Our Milwaukeeans. We're used to working hard and facing challenges with grit and heart. And this temporary pause, this time of distance, this is how we make a statement. This is how we emerge victoriously. Because in choosing empty sidewalks, shuttered shops, and social distance, we display our strength and selflessness. Distance doesn't equal division. We're a city of makers, doers, and innovators who are adapting with grace and optimism. It's how we make an impact. Our name means gathering place by the water, and we will converge together again. But for now, this is how we turn the tide. Amidst the stillness, we are preparing for a wave of resurgence, one that will have a vast ripple effect, one that will make us stronger. Until then, stay safe, stay home, and stay unified. Milwaukee will rise again, and we will make it happen together.
Good morning and welcome back to the 2021 WEDA Governors Conference on Economic Development, and happy Friday. I want to make sure to mention that with the distribution of the vaccines coming, we're hoping to move the legislative day from in-person to virtual for the fall. Be sure to stay tuned to our website for updates. I also want to make you aware that we will have a CRA kickoff meeting at 10 a.m. on February 24th. It will be virtual, and we're really excited to reignite the network. We really encourage CRA member banks and WEDA members to attend. To kick off this morning's program, please welcome the President of WEDC, Secretary Missy Hughes.
Good morning, WEDA, and welcome back to this year's Governor's Conference on Economic Development. We so appreciate you being here with us once again. I want to take a moment and thank U.S. Bank for presenting this year's conference and their continued effort to promote economic development within the state of Wisconsin. Our first panel of the day will be moderated by David Kircher. Wisconsin tourism and hospitality leaders will reflect on 2020 and the economic impact it has had on this industry across the state. The discussion will include some unique approaches that were implemented to keep this industry alive while planning forward for 2021 and beyond. Welcome, David and the panelists.
Well, good morning, WEDA audience. Unfortunately, I can't see you, but we know you're out there virtually. And welcome to our panel on tourism this morning. Bob Denick and I kind of noodled over this, what would make an attractive audience or an attractive panel of all stars who can help us feel optimistic coming out of this COVID problem. First up on the panel is Alex Lasry. Thank you, Alex, for joining us. We thought it appropriate for you to be part of the panel because of your corporation having a wide reach across the tourism and industries, entertainment industries, sports, concert events, and your community involvement with the Milwaukee Bucks, the staff, and the players. Not unlike the Brewers and the Packers, the Bucks provide a major billboard in promoting the state of Wisconsin throughout the country and internationally. Alex is very active in the community. I'm involved with minority chambers of commerce in economic development, and Alex and a number of his staff are prominently participating. So Alex, why don't you go ahead and roll it? I feel like I should have my Jim Paschke voice rehearsal introducing you, but why don't you roll it and give us a take on how you and the Bucks organization have waded your way through. And we see that you're working on limited attendance for Bucks games, and we look forward to that. So take it away.
Well, thanks, Dave, and thanks everyone for having me. It's great to be here. This has been one of the most trying times I think in our business, and one of the most I think difficult years that we've had. And I'm sure a lot of the other people on this panel will agree to that. This has been unlike something we've ever seen. A year-long pandemic. Of a viral disease that really affects the service industry. And we are a business that is built on having customers participating in an event, being crammed together and really close to one another, which turns out to be the fastest way to spread this disease. So I just want to start by kind of giving a quick arena overview on Fiserv Forum. So when we first got here about 7 or 8 years ago, and we purchased the team, one of the requirements for the arena was for the Bucks was that we had to build a new arena. The Bradley Center was badly outdated and was not suitable for a 21st century basketball team. But what we really wanted was to make sure that this was going to be something that was bigger than basketball. We wanted to create an arena that was going to be the new living room for Milwaukee and really turn Wisconsin into a top sports and entertainment destination. This was not just about the Milwaukee Bucks. This was about something bigger and creating kind of that new living room for Milwaukee. So as we built it, we wanted to make sure this was something that was built in Wisconsin by people from Wisconsin. So we made sure that it was built 100% union, paid a living wage. We had 30% of all our service contracts done by minority-owned businesses, and 80% of all the materials were sourced right here from Wisconsin. And so it took us about 2 years to build, and we had grand ambitions. It wasn't just Fiserv Forum that we built at the time. We also built a practice facility. So we brought the Bucks practice facility downtown and partnered with Freighter at the Medical College of Wisconsin to build one of their first downtown clinics and doctor's offices to put right in the middle of downtown. As a result, this was a huge success. In our first year, we were selling out Bucks games. We had concerts that were originally skipping Milwaukee. And now they can't wait to come back. We had in our first month, Justin Timberlake, what we called Mill Rock Fest, where we had, 4 rock concerts in the same week. We were, really on pace to, I think, be, and we were in that first year, I think one of the most successful arenas, not just in the Midwest, but in North America. And, again, that's something that we take a lot of pride in because, again, I think, where people were skipping the Bradley Center and not coming to Milwaukee, where the Bradley Center was really just operating for Bucks and Marquette games. We were finding that we were actually looking to have 250 days of activation. And as a result, we created the Plaza for outdoor events like Bloody Mary Fest and, outdoor movies. And then we also wanted to create the Deer District, which was going to become an area where that was going to be a mix of local and national chains and our plan for that was either we wanted them to be unique to Wisconsin or uniquely Wisconsin. And so Good City Brewing was one of those uniquely Wisconsin local, breweries that we brought downtown. We created the Sports Mecca Bar and Grill with an outdoor beer garden. And then we wanted to, add some national change. So these were going to be things that were going to be unique to Wisconsin. So Punch Bowl Social, Insomnia Cookies, and then we also were able to add Drink Wisconsinly downtown as well. But then also we had, what we thought was going to be the pinnacle of the year, that we were able to bring the DNC convention to Milwaukee. This is the biggest convention that you could have other than a Super Bowl. And until they start playing the Super Bowl in the summertime, we're probably not getting one of those. So the Democratic National Convention was going to be the biggest thing that we could get. 50,000 people coming to Milwaukee from all over the world. Thousands of people from the national media, hundreds of $millions of economic impact. This was going to be the year that we were going to put Milwaukee and Wisconsin on the map in a way you couldn't before. It was going to show the world that we could be a top tier convention city, that we could handle big conventions, and that we can compete with cities like Houston, Miami, and Chicago as a top tier city. So, this was going to be, kind of our year. We were going to go from what was going to be a Bucks championship run right into, into Summerfest, and then into the convention, and then hopefully a Brewers World Series run, and then right into the Ryder Cup. So this was going to be a big year for Milwaukee, but COVID had other plans. COVID hit in the middle of March, and I remember where I was the day we found out the NBA was shutting down. I was actually at a bar with some friends. I had just found out my wedding was canceled due to COVID. And then we were at a bar trying to, in only the Wisconsin way, drink away your pain. And found out that night as we were watching that the NBA was shutting down because a few players had contracted COVID. And then kind of everything stopped. That first, I'd say 2 weeks, felt like, sometimes it felt like it was just one day. Sometimes it felt like it was a year. But we had no idea what was really happening. We knew that we were shut down for a certain period of time, but we didn't know, was this going to be a month? Was this going to be a year? Was it going to be 6 months, 2 years? Who knew? And this was going to dramatically change our business. And as I said, this was probably one of the most difficult times in our business that's built on customers coming somewhere. And as more details of what coronavirus was, what you actually started to find out was that this was something that was passed on through breathing and spitting and from being in close contact with someone for a certain period of time, which is exactly what sports and concerts are. And so this became one of the places where you found out that arenas were actually probably one of the worst places to be at the height of this pandemic. What we then tried to do was innovate and try to say, okay, we know the arena is going to be shut down, so how can we be a leader in this industry? We had to furlough some workers. We worked with our union to make sure that people were taken care of. And then we worked with our players to help start a fund to help pay workers for the first couple months of this pandemic, because we looked at this as something that happened through no fault of their own, and they shouldn't be the ones bearing the brunt of this. So we helped with the fund. We raised over $1 million to help make sure that we could get them through the tough times until the federal government came in with their unemployment insurance, the extension. We used the the food that we actually had for the playoff games that we had bought, that we weren't going to be able to use, and turn those into meals that could be for our workers and for other people who were in need of meals. And we also tried to lead with Mask Up Milwaukee, where we used Fiserv Forum as a distribution center for masks around the city and southeastern Wisconsin. So this was, this was super difficult. We then played in there was a bubble created in Orlando, an entire, racial and social justice movement that happened this summer that we tried to be a part of and lead on. But I think now, as we kind of come to, as we're now almost a year in to what this pandemic, we actually are now seeing some signs of recovery and some signs of hope. We're starting to see concerts are rebooking for, with us in late 2021, early 2022. We're starting to see a vaccine rollout. We're actually looking to get fans back in the arena, hopefully in the next 2 to 4 weeks as we work with the Milwaukee Health Department. We saw, I think, how successful the Packers were. I was able to go to one of the games, and they actually did an incredible job of making everyone feel safe and not that they were in danger. They had great pods. Everyone wore their masks. I was incredibly impressed with how serious everyone took wearing a mask. I guess no one wants to make sure they get kicked out of a Packer game, so I was very impressed with that. And at no time felt like anyone was on top of me or anything like that. So we're going to take a lot of lessons that we saw from that and try to put that into Bucks games. How can we maybe have 25% capacity, put people in pods, and make sure that we're rapid testing maybe before games so that people are able to again try to make this as safe as possible for people who are going to come back and cheer on the Bucks. We're slowly bringing our workers back. So as we are able to bring fans back, more people will be coming into work, which will be great. And I think one of the more impressive things is we're continuing to see investment. COVID right now is looking a little, maybe possibly more of a really difficult blip in our look down the line, rather than maybe something that is going to have a continued effect on the development prospects of the Deer District. We've got a new Marriott hotel that was announced, and they're hoping to, I think, have completion by 2022, 2023. What we are seeing is the Deer District is still a place where people want to invest and be a part of, and we're continuing to see other people who are bidding on a lot of the other land that we have around there. So, this is, again, this has been a really difficult year. And a lot of our other panelists will talk about how tough this year has been for our industry. But, while we didn't have the summer that we were hoping for with the championship run, the convention, Ryder Cup, I think what we should be able to take from this is Milwaukee was able to show that it can compete with any city for convention business. It was able to show that we should be considered one of the top tier cities in this country. And in the next 5-10 years, Milwaukee should be able to prove, and hopefully we've proved to ourselves, and now we can prove to the world, that Milwaukee is here to stay. And we're going to be competing with Miami and Houston and beating them out for a lot of for the big events. It's something that I'm really proud of. And it's something that I hope that we all look forward to. We're going to continue to innovate and use this as a way to think differently about our business. I have no doubt our business has fundamentally changed in ways that that we're going to try to figure out. So that's something that we're going to be doing over the next few months and years to try to make sure everyone who comes in feels safe. And again, it's going to, I think, fundamentally change how we, maybe use and view concerts and games. So, this has been a troubling year, but I see a lot of really exciting things in the future, and a lot of great prospects for Milwaukee as we come out of this. So thank you, and looking forward to your questions at the end.
Well, Alex, we've got a question from the audience. Maybe we could take now. How will the Bucks decide who can attend games once the forum reopens?
So that, season ticket holders will be our first priority. And, then we're still working with, the Milwaukee Health Department and figuring out as a team how will, we divvy up season ticket holder tickets versus, offering them to the general public. But my sense is that it's going to be season ticket holders will have a priority, and then we'll take it from there.
And then I've got a question personally. I'm a Wisconsin Badger fan, big time. And you did have a hockey tournament scheduled for this holiday that was put on deferral. Do you see that coming back on the calendar?
I hope so. I don't know if it'll be that one that moved, but I do expect us to. I think it was the Big Ten championship. I do expect us to be going after, again, continuing to make sure that we're getting, some of the biggest events here, because That's what Fiserv Forum, I think, has shown that it can do. It can bring the biggest events to Milwaukee and Wisconsin and shine a light and give us that national spotlight.
And including hockey, which you haven't had up to this point, which would be good for everyone. Thank you very much, Alex. Next up is Kathleen O'Leary from Wisconsin State Fair. Thank you, Kathleen, for joining us. Kathleen, your participation also to be part of this panel, because your venue has a wide reach across tourism and entertainment, rather all-inclusive to major attended events, the State Fair itself, the Expo, all manner of entertainment and conference events. Your facility has been around since, I don't know, before the turn of the century? I mean, the last century. And I am familiar with many of your Fair and Grandstand Avenue vendors, and probably more leaning on the beverage side than cheese. But why don't you give us a little overview on the continuing evolution of your entertainment and expo activity. It's been limited, but you still have things going on all year round. Go ahead.
Thank you, David. And thank you to everyone attending this session, as well as the esteemed panel with me today, virtually. I'm honored to be part of this discussion. As David shared, well, from my bio, we didn't read the bio, but I have been at the Wisconsin State Fair Park in various roles for 24 years. I've been the CEO, executive director, since I was appointed by the Wisconsin State Fair Park Board of Directors in 2016. I am truly humbled to lead an incredibly talented staff and be at the helm of an institution that is steeped in 170 years of tradition and is vitally important to the tourism industry in Wisconsin. For those of you who may not be aware, State Fair Park, as David said, is a year-round entertainment venue that hosts not only the Wisconsin State Fair, the 11-day celebration of everything we should be so proud of in our great state of Wisconsin, but also hundreds of activities, events, meetings, agricultural shows, all throughout the 4 seasons. It is home to the Wisconsin Exposition Center, Tommy G. Thompson Youth Center, the Milwaukee Mile Speedway, Case IH Coliseum, a full-service RV park, and many other facilities throughout the entire 200 acres. Speaking for the fair industry in the United States, which accounts for $4.7 billion in estimated annual revenues, not including vendors, concessionaires, entertainers, ride operators revenue, we were challenged every day at every turn. There is no question, as Alex had said, and we all know, that 2020 was unthinkable in so many ways for all of us, personally and professionally. Unfortunately, as you know, in late May, we made the agonizing decision to cancel the 2020 Wisconsin State Fair for only the 6th time in the history of the fair. All but one of the other 5 cancellations were due to wars. The 5th was due to the fear of low attendance because the World's Fair was being held in Chicago. I think it's important for you also to know that by the time we made the official fair cancellation, we had already canceled or postponed multiple events that would have taken place at the fair park. Since March of 2020, over 80 public and private events that would have generated revenue for the fair park have been canceled, in addition to the 2020 Wisconsin State Fair. As you can see, prior to the cancellations in 2020, from the slide, the Wisconsin State Fair welcomed more than 1 million guests for 7 consecutive years. The fair park has a tremendous footprint in terms of economic impact in southeastern Wisconsin and throughout the entire state. The fair alone, the 11 days, generated more than $250 million of economic impact in 2019, and that does not include the other hundreds of non-fair events we typically host each year. Overall, State Fair Park generates upwards of $30.7 million in gross revenue annually between the 11-day fair and the year-round events. And as you can see, also from the slide, up until 2020, we were steadily increasing revenues and attendance annually. And as you can see here, given the impact of the cancellations, we had to make drastic cuts, both in payroll and non-payroll expenses. Payroll expenses were reduced by approximately 30%. This reduction came in two forms. The first was not hiring our diverse seasonal employee pool of more than 1,600 people that we typically hire in preparation for the fair season, but also eliminating 16 year-round employees. Within our budget for the first fiscal year, which runs July 1st through June 30th, we planned for a 64% reduction in terms of non-payroll operating expenses. And I am proud to say the staff has been extremely fiscally prudent. And at this point, a little more than halfway through this budget, we have realized an additional $500,000 in savings above what was originally projected. So that clearly paints a snapshot of the very challenging canvas of how we are continuing to navigate financially through these uncharted waters. However, I would like to now shift the focus from all of the hardship, the difficult decisions, even though they were the right decisions, to what we needed to do to remain financially viable and continue to contribute to Wisconsin's economy during the pandemic. What I can attest to is when staring in the face of the uncharted waters of a pandemic, resilience, creativity, innovative thinking, and flexibility needed to be paramount, and it continues to be to this day. As soon as we knew we were leaning to make the tough decision to cancel the 2020 fair, I brought my staff together, via Zoom, of course, just to keep things even more challenging. But I challenged them to immediately begin brainstorming what we could do to safely bring a little slice of the fair and sweeten the sting of the disappointment of the cancellation to our loyal fairgoers, while also generating much needed revenue. The two criteria the staff was tasked with was any and all ideas had to be, number one, monetized, and number two, they needed to be at the level of excellence of every event we execute and produce at Wisconsin State Fair Park. I am proud to share that the multiple innovative programs that we developed were branded Fair Necessities, which became a model for many other large fairs and expositions throughout the country. I would like to share a couple of the components with you and the successful results this morning. On June 23rd, we announced, yes, there will be cream puffs. The media and the public definitely took notice and were so excited, given that our signature cream puffs are loved by so many, and we actually sold upwards of 400,000 cream puffs at the 2019 Wisconsin State Fair, just a little statistic. We knew this was a great way to kick off all of the other fair necessity programs. While the cream puff drive-through concept definitely, as I said, got the attention, got the excitement, and ultimately was incredibly successful, selling more than 200,000 cream puffs in just the 8 days, the flagship of the Fair Necessities was really the fair food drive-through. Because this truly had never been done before, it took weeks of logistical planning to make it happen. It was taking theory and making it reality. We ended up modeling it after an interstate concept where vehicles could get on and off the main route at the vendors of their choosing. Both the track and the interior road course of the historic Milwaukee Mile provided a great pathway for the first part of the route and also enhanced the experience by actually having people be able to drive on the racetrack, which they loved. Once through the track area, the vehicles were directed to the second half that wound them through the interior of the fair park and ultimately ended at the original Cream Puff Pavilion. We rotated 22 vendors over 16 long days on Thursdays through Sundays for 4 weekends, beginning July 23rd and ending on August 16th, which would have been the last day of the 2020 Wisconsin State Fair. More than 58,000 vehicles came through the drive-through with very happy and hungry people. This equated to an average of 400 vehicles per hour, with the highest being 726 cars per hour on the third Thursday, which would have been the opening day of the 2020 Wisconsin State Fair. Our parking partner, Interstate Parking, was extremely helpful in assisting with the logistical layout and design of the route and executing the event, along with our full-time staff who also work day in and day out with welcoming smiles to make it all run smoothly and safely. This event not only far exceeded our goal in terms of revenue, it also allowed many of our vendors to generate revenue at a time when they were not able to open their restaurants or concession stands or travel to other fairs or events. Our event and the fair industry as a whole is truly the livelihood of many of our vendors and concessionaires at the Wisconsin State Fair. And this event not only helped us generate much needed revenue, but we know that it helped many of our vendors stay financially viable in these very, very difficult times. Understanding the love for the iconic original cream puff, in addition to the on-site drive-through option that we created, we also decided to take cream puffs on the road for the first time ever. Why not? We wanted to spread the joy of the dairy delicacy throughout the state. Traveling cream puffs were sold in 3 other cities in Wisconsin. We went to Kenosha, Appleton, and Madison. People in those communities came in droves and were elated. The traveling cream puffs accounted for 16% of the overall sales, with 35,000 puffs being sold. Another element of our program that offered economic opportunity to many of our vendors was our newly created online shopping portal. The goal was to recreate the fair vendor shopping experience in a virtual form, which we had obviously never done before. So this endeavor was also quite the undertaking for our staff, but our vendors were extremely thankful for this opportunity to sell their items and allowed for even more of our vendors to keep their businesses viable, even without having the State Fair event. With a keen focus on equity and economic development, every year on opening day of the fair, we work with Hunger Task Force to collect food for those in need. And we felt it was important to keep this tradition going, especially during the pandemic when people in our community were out of work and the hunger was at its highest. People were able to donate food and in return received a free ticket good for any day of the 2021 Wisconsin State Fair. We also worked with Hunger Task Force and their dairy recovery program to help support Wisconsin agriculture and give families fresh milk and dairy products as part of their food distribution. So for any contribution over $10 to the program, donors received a complimentary 2021 fair ticket as well for this program. And we are proud to have helped raise over $26,000 for the dairy recovery program. Speaking of dairy, agriculture is the cornerstone of the Wisconsin State Fair. So we made sure to bring ag to our fairgoers by creating videos for social media that highlighted everything from cow and goat milking to canine sports to chick hatching. We also highlighted our junior exhibitors in their last year of eligibility, along with our livestock and competitive exhibitors with more than 10 years of experience. And finally, our loyal sponsor, Case IH, awarded $7,500 to 10 youth who submitted videos and essays about their livestock showing experience. Despite the cancellation of the 2020 State Fair, we had a number of sponsors who stepped up and supported the State Fair Necessities Program, securing nearly $250,000 in sponsorship revenue and in-kind support. We also are proud to report that every program we executed had sponsors tied to it and are extremely thankful to those sponsors who continued to support us. In total, we grossed more than $3.7 million with the multiple fair necessity programs, as well as our sold-out drive-in concert featuring King and Country. The success of the cream puffs also prompted us to create not 1, not 2, but 3 additional cream puff drive-thrus. The 3rd and final cream puff drive-thru begins next week, February 11th through the 14th for Valentine's Day, and will feature strawberry cream puffs, which are delicious, and the fan favorite cocoa cream puffs, which we featured at the holidays. A little intel for everyone. If you're excited about this, you can still pre-order your cream puffs until Sunday at wistatefair.com. The overall response to the success of our programs was overwhelming. We received numerous thank yous in various ways, and not just from our fairgoers, but from our vendors, our sponsors, our community partners, and more. The fact that we could spread so much joy and were able to keep many small businesses afloat by hosting these programs during these unprecedented times is extremely rewarding and ridiculously humbling. As we look to the future, equity, inclusion, and diversity are at the forefront of our planning, as always. As I previously mentioned, we look forward to welcoming back the more than 1,600 seasonal employees we typically hire for the fair alone. And these are just State Fair Park hired employees. This does not include the people that are hired to work for our vendors, our Spin City amusement ride and game operators, and many others who hire a very diverse workforce, and not only in terms of ethnicity, but also age and income. In closing, I will leave you all with just this little bit of positivity to hold on to. The Wisconsin State Fair staff is working tirelessly, planning the 2021 Wisconsin State Fair, August 5th through the 15th. Safety of our fairgoers, our vendors, the staff, exhibitors, and partners remain our top priority. We will be focused on heightened safety measures and sanitization protocols throughout the fair park. We will remain cautiously optimistic moving forward and are continuously monitoring the science, the data, and the statistics surrounding the pandemic. We truly hope we can all safely gather to create memories that transcend generations at the 2021 Wisconsin State Fair, presented by US Cellular in 180 days. Thank you, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you very much, Kathleen. A lot of eye-opening statistics there, and I'm sure for the benefit of the audience, some great tips for promotional activities that the ED directors and Chamber of Commerce attendees can take back to their counties for enhancement of their county fairs. All of these are just wonderful. That's great. Great work. Thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you.
We're now going to have Greg Marcus. Welcome, Greg. Greg, Marcus Corporation, 1936, started with a little theater in Ripon, Wisconsin, and I've been there in the theater. It's gorgeous. We wanted you on the panel for the diversity of your corporation in the hotel industry, entertainment, theaters, motels, hotels, conventions, conference facilities. In fact, we've had this WEDA conference at the Hilton City Center for a number of years and might have been there this year except of COVID. We'd like to see or hear from you also about your reach. You can expand on that and how you and your staffs have reacted to and innovated during this pandemic and what your take is coming out of it.
Sure. Thanks, Dave. You know, that we still own that one theater in Ripon, Wisconsin. That's the we call that the Shrine, the first theater that my grandfather built 85 years ago. You know, on the one hand, the headlines tell us how unbelievably challenging, you know, these times are. And the hotel and hospitality industry has certainly seen its fair share. But at the Marcus Corporation, we've also seen a lot of good that we hope to take forward with us in 2021 and beyond. And let me build a little bit on our company and your description of us, Dave, for I think most people know, but we were founded 85 years ago right here in Wisconsin. We're the fourth largest movie circuit in the country, and we own or manage 18 hotels and resorts properties across the country. In Wisconsin alone, our hotel division includes 1,400 hardworking associates and then another 700 in the theater division, plus 61 corporate associates because our headquarters is here. So that gives us just over 2,100 people. And frankly, I hate to tell you, that's 20 people living and contributing to our quality of life here in Wisconsin. And that number's down substantially. We were probably close to 3,500 to 4,000, at peak times during the summer season, things like that. So we are, and we anticipate going back up again, but right now we're down. Ours is a family company with 3 generations of leadership and commitment to Wisconsin. That's economic commitment, philanthropic commitment, community commitment. And when I say family, it's not just those with Marcus as a last name. It's those with Marcus on their name tag. And who every day deliver exceptional experience to our guests. We truly are like family. I mean, I'm in the Pfister today, at least virtually, and these people are like my family. I've grew up in this hotel, and as we've known for 85 years, hospitality is a wonderful career with low barriers to entry and a tremendous opportunity for upward mobility. In fact, Catalyst lists hospitality as the top career where you can start at the very bottom and climb to the top. Throughout our history, we've had many associates climb the ladder and become some of the firsts in the industry. For example, Rosemary Steinfest was the first woman general manager of the Pfister Hotel. She started as my grandfather's personal secretary in 1956 before working her way to GM. This was during a time when most executives in the hospitality industry were men. We surveyed our Marcus Hotels executives and GMs recently. The vast majority started working in hospitality in high school as dishwashers and servers. And that includes our new chief commercial officer, Andrew Flack, who started his career while still in college, working part-time at his family's hotel in the United Kingdom. In fact, I actually, one of my first jobs was in a hotel. My trajectory was not as good apparently because I started off working in accounting. My dad found me. I was helping out and doing clerk work in our accounting department, and I rose to piano player in blue. That's my other gig. So apparently my trajectory is just a little bit more flat, but I kid. That's one of the things about virtual meetings, and you can't even get a group laugh, and that is I'll go on a quick little tangent about the future too here, and that is, human beings want to be together, and that is what gives me hope for the future, and knowing that we will come back as an industry. I can't tell you how long it's all going to take. I'll give you some estimates, but we're about being together as people laughing together in a room. These virtual events are good, and it helps us get through this time, but it's really a bridge. It's not the destination. The destination is getting back together as people. And in fact, the biggest problem we've had, in a way, if you think about it, with the pandemic, is getting people to stop being together so that we can get together again. And it's challenging, and yet gives us hope at the same time. But getting back to careers in the hospitality business, we've been invested for years in introducing hospitality as both a meaningful and accessible career. We're a founding member of ProStart. It's a nationwide 2-year high school program with the National Restaurant Association. We helped develop the curriculum for many high schools in Milwaukee. We're active with Employ Milwaukee and their industry advisory board for hospitality as they focus on creating career paths and training with special programming like culinary apprenticeships for students. We even had plans to leverage the DNC for people's career growth, and I thank Alex for really being the guy who helped get the DNC here. I mean, it just didn't happen, but for Alex Lazary, and I think people know that, but you can't say it enough times. And I thank you, Alex. It didn't happen, but yet, I've said to people many times, well, trust me, I would have loved to have the DNC here, maybe just about as much as Alex, but what it's still said, we got it. I mean, we didn't get to have the event itself, but the residual impact of that should be felt in our community for many years, because it said this is a big league city. This city can handle things like that. This community, not just the city, the state, because it really was going to be virtually, to really benefit the entire state. So we were very excited about having it, and it would be good for people's career growth. It was poised to be an awesome opportunity for Marcus Hotels to partner with the Milwaukee Public Schools and offer young people meaningful experience in the industry while serving as ambassadors for our hotels and the city of Milwaukee. With the Bucks and others, we were working to expand a ready workforce to welcome the guests and delegates. Well, of course, that ended how nobody wanted. Hopefully, the experience sparked some future career interest for people too. So how's the pandemic impacted the hospitality industry as a whole? Well, hotels, as you know, were among the first hit, and we're still among the hardest hit. We're open, and our goal, frankly, is to be open. That is what we try to do. And unfortunately, our calculus, which is not a great calculus, is to decide, are we better off open or closed? Being open doesn't mean that we're really making any money yet, but it does mean that we're providing jobs for people. It does mean that we're helping the community with a place for people to stay, because people still do need to travel and have places to stay. And so it's good for our company and good for our community to be open if we can be open. And actually, all of our hotels are open now. Some are doing a little better than others, but overall, but interestingly, in what we see, what we're seeing is the properties like the Grand Geneva, where we have a heavy leisure segment. That's the stuff that we see coming back stronger. When the consumer can make their own decision, they want to come, they want to get away, they want to travel. Again, they want to be amongst other people, and that is what gives us hope. Business travelers, if you're responsible for somebody, you're a little more reticent to send somebody on the road. And so that's going to take longer. We don't expect a full recovery until 2024 because of that aspect of it. And it also takes time to plan. You can decide to go to the Grand Geneva, the week before or 2 weeks before, depending on if we have availability. You can't plan a conference with a week's notice. You need 6 months, a year. There's a longer lead time to that kind of stuff. And frankly, the business travel, what we see, what'll happen, what I think, we've seen this before too, is everyone says, I can call my customers on Zoom. I don't have to travel. And then one day, the salesperson walks into their boss's office and says, I just lost the XYZ account. And the boss says, what happened? And the person says, our competitor actually went there and called on them. And so the boss says, you might want to get on the road. So once we get past all this, I think we'll see that dynamic occurring again. The impact on jobs, though, which means people, cannot be understated. Over 4 million jobs were lost in the hospitality industry alone last year. The impact on economies is staggering. Direct state and local tax revenues across the country generated from hotels fell by approximately $13 billion in 2020. For context, the impact of COVID-19 on the travel industry is more than 9 times that of 9/11, and that's from the HLA. Here in Wisconsin, we're no different. Rapid increases in hotel cancellations led us to close several hotels by March 24th. Deemed an essential business, we continued operations to other properties until April 8th, when all properties were closed. Decisions were agonizing because of the people involved. On the one hand, we had to navigate our business through an unprecedented freeze. On the other, we had people who are part of the Marcus family who we felt deep responsibility for. We made a choice: help as many of our people for as long as we possibly can. That included providing an additional 2 weeks of layoff pay to associates temporarily laid off as a bridge to unemployment compensation. Between hotels and our theater business, we paid over $5 million in temporary layoff pay to bridge the gap between when they were laid off and when they were able to claim unemployment benefits. We also incurred hundreds of thousands of dollars extending the health insurance benefits of temporary laid off associates. We sought government assistance when available for payroll support. Our hotels spent over $10 million on qualified expenses using PPP loan proceeds, of which approximately 90% directly benefited associates. I think that's something I really need to talk about, which some reporters have gotten right, and some reporters have not really been accurate in their reporting. And it's very salacious to write, public company gets help. Well, we've lost a ton of money. And by the way, we've actually gotten no help ourselves. The PPP loans, are very minimal. The PPP loans, were basically pass-throughs to the associates, and we're closed. So it's not like we could pay associates and be open and earn revenue. We were closed. What we were doing was essentially helping them, during time of unemployment, and helping the government, and also helping them be part of something. We wanted them to still feel part of an organization. That's good for us, but the financial benefits were absolutely minuscule. Really, the only benefit we've got was from the state of Wisconsin. I thank the governor, and I thank Joel Brennan and the administration. The money that they gave out as grants that came from part of the CARES Act, we were grateful and thankful for. But that's it. That's it. And that's been very, it's given the magnitude of the losses that we've had, which have been staggering. And it's really due to my grandfather's, the reason we're only even here, I'm even here to be able to talk to you. So my grandfather had a very, philosophy about not over leveraging the company. And so while we had some leverage, we didn't over leverage. And so we've had to take on leverage to get through these times. But I thought it was important to people to know that what public or private, a public company, we don't have, we still have tons of employees to take care of, and we still have no business. I mean, our revenues are down, 90%. So, and we were virtually closed for a long period of time. So there really was no financial benefit to us. But we thought we were doing the right thing, trying to take care of our employees. And as I said, of the money, of the 90%, we had $800 million of revenue in 2019. $1 million, if we kept $1 million from the PPP loans, think about what that is. So in any event, the vast majority of our associates were hired during that time. Any colleagues, and then we banded together. The other thing that happened at that time, when we were going through the really toughest times, and you can see it in the slide, our own colleagues got together to help people, and they said, let's start our own website, Marcus Cares. So we created this internet website, and what we wanted to do was help people get through these times. Our own people, it wasn't my idea. It was my idea. It probably wouldn't have been very good. But our associates said, let's do this. And so we then put on this website guidance on how to file for unemployment, job postings for other industries, companies, companies to our affected associates, household management, how to get help from Spectrum for families with kids learning from home, to get your internet speeds up, resources for help with food and essentials, COVID-19 resources, how to avoid scams, distributing toiletries to employees, as we all remember the toilet paper shortage, food drives for associates in the greater Milwaukee community. And then we even have a private Facebook group for associates to support one another. And it was really important because as we all became separated and distanced, that need to be together still remains no matter where you are. We also doubled down on caring for and retaining employees who remained with the company. We are a communicative organization. But I know more than ever, our associates needed not only to hear from me and Michael Evans and Rolando Rodriguez, Michael being the president of Hotels and Resorts and Rolando of Theaters. In addition to email communications, we relied a lot on video. I've done video communications. Our field leadership teams also reached out to associates one-on-one to maintain communication with everybody. And once we were able to open our doors again, they took extra efforts to ensure open lines of communication with their staff while showing appreciation for their hard work and dedication during these difficult times. It's a long list of things that we've done to take care of it. There's also a long list of things we'd like to throw into the dumpster fire that was 2020. But there are some positives, and let's talk about those. One, we learned how resilient we are. Our industry and company have weathered crises before. 9/11, the 2008 financial crisis are just the two recent ones. In some ways, our company was built for this moment. This is what I talk about. I'm talking about what I talked about before. Our company and our history, we've always maintained a strong balance sheet, low leverage. We have an incredible leadership team who worked day and night to further shore up our cash position and make sure we were doing everything we could for our people. But when I talk about resiliency, I'm talking about those in the front line, those who reopened our doors, who sanitize every square inch of our hotels and restaurants, who smile so big under their masks, their eyes tell you how happy they truly are to see you. And they are. They want to be working. That is why we are open when we can be. They kept showing up, they kept adjusting, and never did they take their eye off the guest experience. Because they want to be working. Frankly, we're making decisions based on it to be better open than closed, as I said. We also got closer to our guests through these times. One of the greatest things about this business is the satisfaction you can get from making somebody's day better. We talk about making somebody's ordinary day. Our ordinary day is somebody's extraordinary day. You can have all the tools and systems in the world, but the most important resource in hospitality is people. We listened intently to our guests and quickly rebuilt an experience that was not only safe, but was welcoming and makes them want to come back, which includes figuring out how to create a bubble for visiting NBA and MLB teams, which we've done. The leisure traveler who want to just get away for a quick trip or reprieve is leading the recovery, as I said, and their feedback and experiences are guiding how we continue to respond. Take a visit to the Pfister or St. Kate. You will see people who want to be there, to celebrate, to relax, to reminisce, to connect, all in a safe way. And because we took the steps we did, our guests continue to trust us at this moment. We also got closer to our own people. I cannot tell you how many stories I have of how our associates went out of their way for each other. But the pandemic also helped break down some invisible barriers. GMs were now on the front line, cleaning, sanitizing, etc. Nothing creates better understanding than walking a mile in someone else's shoes. We got better at our own jobs. The pandemic forced all of us to get better at multitasking, problem solving, collaborating, and we have less people trying to do more work. It just isn't easy, but it required great empathy, understanding, and flexibility to meet people where they are. These are hallmarks of what makes someone great at hospitality, but the pandemic magnified those necessary qualities exponentially. There remains a lot of focus on what we need to do to bring our guests back. Safety and sanitation measures are thoroughly implemented across our properties. We created the Marcus Hotels and Resorts Clean Care Pledge to establish standards for care and training to protect our guests and associates from COVID-19 infection. This pledge is implemented in all our properties, either as an enhancement to brand standards required by Hilton, Marriott, and Hyatt, or as an independent program on par with those that offer some of the strictest standards in the industry. Marketing and sales are doing an outstanding job of creating experiences for guests that are responsive to the times we're in. But there's an equal focus on what we needed to do to bring our people back. As demand grows, so will our hiring. And it is our honor to show more people out there the family-sustaining career opportunities that exist in hospitality. Prior to the pandemic, hotels in the United States supported 1 in every 25 jobs. These jobs are important to the overall health of the nation's economy. Accelerating the work we were doing pre-pandemic to introduce more people to careers in hospitality will be vital. That includes reaching more high school students as they consider their education and career options. ProStart is an example. Continuing our partnerships with area technical colleges to support their culinary and hospitality programs. Creating opportunities for people transforming out of incarceration to reintegrate into the workforce. Our Wisconsin Hospitality Linen Service business unit, which started out as our in-house laundry and serves lots of hotels in the region, is also part of a transitional employment program to offer jobs to those with criminal backgrounds and incarceration. Recruiting a diverse workforce who are reflective of our communities. This includes partnering with community-based organizations that provide resources and training to uniquely abled individuals or those from underserved communities. But most importantly, once they're here, we need to do more to help our colleagues stay, build new skills, and grow their careers. And if we're talking about equity, this is where, as an industry, we need to do a lot better. I mean, it's something that we've known about, but we really have to dedicate ourselves to this. Look, we provide lots of jobs for the more challenged people in our community and the people of color in our community. We are a lot of entry-level work, immigrants coming to the United States. We provide a lot of work for people like that. And we do see them start to move up, but we as an industry, and this is really endemic to the entire industry. We've got to get better at moving them further up the ladder. And because we know they're there, and we know that people can go from the bottom to the top, and we have to call out the problem. And it's, as I said, it's industry wide, and act on it. And that means, identifying people who have a career path and educating them and mentoring them and bringing them through. Because, again, when you start out at the bottom, you know the business through and through. And so we have that. We the one advantage we have is that we know where the people who are interested in the industry are. And so we as an industry have to get better at doing that. We talk a lot about hospitality and the importance of soft skills: communicating, listening, empathizing, time management, self-motivation, responsibility, teamwork. These are the skills you build in a hospitality career. It turns out these are also the skills that get you through a crisis. As I look around our panel, one of the takeaways I hope more realize is the importance all our businesses have on the health of our local and national economies. Pre-pandemic alone, hotels contributed over $185 billion to federal, state, and local taxes and $659 billion to the gross domestic product. That's just hotels. Now add in sports, movie theaters, which is our business, music venues, cultural events, festivals, and more. The impact is staggering. But beyond the economic impact, there's something to be said for what all of us contribute to building strong societies. It's proven that communities with high levels of trust perform better economically and socially. Sitting at home, isolated, is not helping build the bonds of trust at best, and probably making it worse at a time when we need social trust more than ever. And you think, what's going on in this country? Our bonds of social trust are frayed. And yet, if you have a high level of social trust, if you know your neighbor, if you know the people in your community, you will your community will be perform better, as I said, economically, socially, on all levels. It's studied and it's known. And that's why at the end of the day, this idea of saying, well, we're all just going to sit home and watch, Netflix. Netflix is great, but if that's what that is not a good way for our world to be. Imagine going out to a movie theater and just sitting with people that may not look exactly like you, being in hotels, being out in restaurants, doing all these things, going to Bucks games. This is not only is it good because people want to be together, but it's good for our community. And that's what gives me hope and why we have to get back to that and promote that. I also want to talk for a minute about vaccination, since I'm talking about equity and the key to our business. Vaccination is the key to getting our businesses back. I think we all agree the process needs to move as fast as possible. Until people feel safe, we're all going to be challenged. And vaccination is the key to people feeling safe. But equity is an important theme here too, from both the supply and demand side of the equation. And when I say supply, I'm speaking about more than just availability of vaccine, because having vaccine is one thing, but providing vaccine is another. We must get the vaccine to people where they are, and for people that cannot come out to get it. Mass vaccination sites are great. Actually, they're imperative. That's going to be the way we get, to get the numbers we need to get to in the vaccination numbers. But for those without access to transportation, more likely than not in disadvantaged communities, we need to bring the vaccine to them. And that's not enough. We also have to address the demand side of the equation, because there's always two sides. Supply is getting the vaccine there to them. But if they don't want to take it, it does no good to get them there. As they say, frozen vaccine on the shelf is not going to help us at all. And what I'm talking about here is vaccine hesitation. This is especially prevalent in our communities of color, who are understandably wary of vaccines. There is a long history that has caused this mistrust. We must recognize it, and we must overcome it. We need role models to get vaccinated publicly, because leaders signal. And then we must do a far better job of getting information about the vaccine out to our people and those we serve in a way that addresses their questions and their fears. This is not about telling people they need to get vaccinated or they have to get vaccinated. It is about educating them on the safety and the need to vaccinate. It is especially important given these communities have been disproportionately affected by the virus. In the end, this is a marketing issue. We need our brightest marketing minds working on how to communicate these important points to those who are vaccine hesitant. Not only is it vital for the health of our communities, but as I said, it is vital to getting our industry back on track. Someday this will all be behind us, and there will be a lot of look backs and what ifs. But my hope is some of what we've learned and who we have become will last for a long time. Resiliency, connecting more to what really matters, flexibility, and going above and beyond to care and elevate others. Thank you.
Greg, thank you. This is great stuff. We out on the street just don't realize what goes on behind corporate doors. And with the extent of your organization and the extent that you do reach out to the community, and especially with your employees, that's a very impressive report. The Marcus Cares slide, I was looking that over. Is that part of your website? Is it accessible to the audience here?
No, it's not. It's our private. It's an intranet. It's our private
internal. But I'm sure there's much information on your website regarding your operation and your employment practices and hiring opportunities.
Oh yes.
I got a question here before we move on. So Alex mentioned that they have a hotel in design and will be shortly under development, anticipating full recovery. You must be excited about the Wisconsin Center moving forward. Timing on that also enhancing the whole hotel and entertainment district of downtown Milwaukee. Can you comment on that?
Oh, look, I'm thrilled that we're going to be expanding the convention center, and my hat's off to Marty Brooks and the team. That his team has been fantastic in getting that set up. Look, we have to, and I'll tell you, it's so interesting. The people. It's an interesting thing with the people have to remember that the convention center. It's tougher for people, the Fiserv Forum, and it's as heavy lifting as Alex and their team had to do to get the Fiserv Forum, and it was heavy lifting, and we were all in support of it because we know how important it is economically to our community. It's in a way a little bit easier because at least people are they feel passion for the team, and they don't want to lose their team. And they go to the Fiserv Forum, and they're in the Deer District. They do something that is, if you're in the community, you can see yourself being there. If you're in the community, it's a little harder to see yourself at the convention center. And yet, if I went out and said, hey, I got this great idea, I want to build a business, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to make these super widgets, and we're going to manufacture them. We're going to build a huge plant in the middle of downtown, and we're going to manufacture these widgets, and we're going to sell them all over the world, and people are going to send us their money from all over the world that's going to stay in our community, and then none of them are even going to come here and really take much of our resources up. They won't move here, and we're going to provide tons of jobs. You'd be like, how can I help make that happen? Well, that's what a convention center is. And it's not making widgets, but it's selling knowledge and connections and networks, because people come here and they are looking to get together and to learn and to meet and to build and have conferences. And they bring their money with them. They leave their money with us, and then they go. It's just like a manufacturing exporting business, and it's really good for the economy. And so we have to recognize that, and we have to be competitive. And our competitor, because it's a competitive environment, the world is out trying to take care of making sure they can get people to come to their communities. And so that's why we have to do what we did with the convention center. And we did it when we had to, 25 years ago, and it was time to expand again. And I'm thrilled that they got it done.
Great. Thank you very much again. Thank you for your words. We're next going to move to Ann Sayers. Not really a rookie, but just new to the position, the acting secretary of Department of Tourism for the state of Wisconsin. And welcome, Ann. Thank you for joining us. We asked you to be a part of the panel to represent state government and give us your insight. The effect that this pandemic has had on the tourism industry across all sectors throughout the state, and all public facilities that you have a finger on throughout the state. So we want to see what you're seeing in the field, your perspective, and coming out of this and promoting the state of Wisconsin. I've got to relay a personal experience recently. I spent a long weekend in Land O'Lakes, Wisconsin last weekend. And I'll tell you, the road was uncongested, and it was kind of quiet. Even snowmobile activity was down. So prop us up a little bit, Ann. Let's hear what Department of Tourism is up to.
Thank you so much, David. Thank you, everyone, for having me. I'm really honored to be here this morning and with all of you on this panel. I'm going to drive my own deck, so bear with me a sec here as I bring it up for you. Can you see it?
I'm seeing it.
Okay, good. Hi. Yes. So, David, your firsthand experience is something I hear about, every day, and it's different in every part of the state. It also is different from week to week. I'm sure the experience last week when there wasn't very much snow in Land O'Lakes is going to look very different than now when they've gotten lots of snow here in the last week. So we'll touch on all of that. I don't want to spend a ton of time today talking about how hard hit we were, because I think we know and we have covered it, and it lives in the background and the forefront of every decision that we make right now. But I do want to say that 2019 was the best year on record for Wisconsin tourism. We hit that 8-to-1 ROI mark, which was historic as far as I know. Typically it's around 6.4 on average, but 8-to-1 means that for every dollar we invested in advertising, the state of Wisconsin received $8 in economic activity in return. And that's a really exciting number. We were, like Alex said, 2020 was supposed to be our year. We wanted to use 19 as a platform to springboard into sort of the next echelon of tourism. And instead, we had 202,000 people in Wisconsin, our friends and our neighbors who rely on hospitality in one way or another for their livelihoods. And they've taken the biggest part of the hit in all of this. We were the first hit. We were the hardest hit. It will take a minute to spring back. And that's really hard. And it is the focus of everything we do. So in our discussion today, what I thought I would do is focus a little bit on talking about how we did our pivoting. Then also I'm excited to touch on equity and the theme of the conference and where we're going next. And David, I think you'll be happy because I really do have a lot of optimism for where we're going next. So just to start out with the pivots, our mission at the Department of Tourism is to inspire travelers to experience Wisconsin. And even though that needed to look different as we went through the pandemic, it was still our focus. So here are some of the ways in which it looked a little bit different. We started out as, I think it's similar to what Marcus Cares was about, but it was #HowWeHelp. Immediately, we began highlighting the stories across Wisconsin of how people were helping one another in those early days. And that was part of reinforcing the brand of Wisconsin. Our brand is good hospitality and kindness and fun. And we were finding that even through some of the hardest early days, and how we help emphasize that with the Wisconsin brand. We also hosted these virtual campfires. We invited people who had visited Wisconsin before to sit around this campfire and share their favorite stories and talk about their plans for the future of visiting Wisconsin. Slow TV was gorgeous footage we shared with PBS of aerial shots of Wisconsin. It was very relaxing during a very stressful time, showing parts of the state that I know many were looking at and saying, I had no idea that was Wisconsin. Again, reinforcing the brand that there's something unexpected to be discovered in Wisconsin. For all of these efforts, we actually received a write-up in the Wall Street Journal as a state that had been very creative about our pivoting and how we have continued to live in the brand and with the mission, but with an understanding that the pandemic had changed absolutely everything. Oh, I forgot to hit the video. You should go check out Slow TV on our website. It's a beautiful moment of Zen. Some other things we did, we really leaned into finding ways to drive people to our website and spend time with the brand. So we had games like Match It Wisconsin. We did lots of getaways and giveaways. We had some competition like the Fish Fry Face-Off and the Wisconsin Brew Down, where we encouraged people to get takeout or to start talking about their favorite Wisconsin brews and breweries, and had friendly competition and just kept the conversation alive. What it is we love about Wisconsin and all the different pieces of the tourism sector, especially restaurants and hotels that were hurting so badly through all of this. We also immediately put up the Wisconsin Travel Pledge, and this was to encourage safe travel for anyone who was coming, but it really was helping to build consumer confidence and just let people know that here in Wisconsin, we were taking this very seriously and that they had reason to feel safe when they did come. You can see the mention of We're All In. That's another way businesses were raising their hands to say, we're taking this seriously, we're following the safety protocols. And encourage travelers, whether they were ready or not, to put Wisconsin in the space in their mind that says this is a safe and welcoming place when I'm ready. This is it's a evergreen part of our website. This will stay until we're through this, because this is an important part of the message we want to be sending to our potential travelers. Another thing we started, we had this incredible foresight, with much credit due to the governor and the Wisconsin State Legislature, that with broad bipartisan support created the Office of Outdoor Recreation and housed it here within the Department of Tourism just months before all of this happened. And it was more brilliant than anyone even knew, because outdoor recreation played such a critical role and continues to through this crisis. So one of the things they did, among many others, is work with the Department of Natural Resources and the Department of Health Services to put together outdoor recreation toolkits. And this was important because so many people were coming to the outdoors for either the first time or returning after a long time away. And it was a good reminder about how to be safe on the trails generally, and then also be pandemic aware out on the trails and make sure everybody felt safe, and that this was a place people could continue to come back to and work out some of the stress that the pandemic was leaving all of us with. It was very popular. We put out one toolkit in the spring. It was by popular demand that we put out another toolkit in the winter, addressing, we talked about fishing, everything from fishing to snowmobiling, kind of how to do it and feel safe. So hopefully, if you've been out on trails, you probably actually saw this signage. Land managers across the state were using it, which was really nice to see. So that's a very quick summary of a whole lot of pivoting that was going on for those first many months. And we feel good about the progress. And one of the indicators we have that it worked is our website. All of that drove back to travelwisconsin.com. And it was kind of staggering how well the website performed last year, given the fact that people really weren't actually traveling. But you can see here some of the ways that we measure. 17% up in organic website traffic. That means that even though we were going to people and asking them to come to us, 17% increase in the number of people who found us organically without us finding them. So that's pretty cool. That 1.5% average session duration increase is very important. The more time people spend on site, we know the more likely they are to convert to a traveler at some point. So that's huge. And I think that has a lot to do with those games and slow TV and ways we were just keeping folks soaking in the brand. We also saw a 41% increase in any content related to outdoor recreation. And you can see how that broke out. 52% up on water activities, 75% up on biking, and 66% up on natural attractions and parks. So there's certainly no denying that it was a good year. It actually ended up being our third best year on record for the website. And then we learned just 5 days ago that January 2021 has broken all the records for all Januaries before it. And we didn't just break the record, we blew it out of the water. We increased performance on our website in January by 12.6% over the best year ever, which happened to be January of 2020. So we feel very good about what that means for the future. And we'll get back to that. Another priority through 2020 was we knew that while folks were trapped at home, they were still consuming all kinds of content, and we wanted to find them where they were. So you can see here all the big brands that we were able to land earned media coverage in over the course of the year. We had 144 national hits that were telling positive stories about Wisconsin, 36 regional outlets, and we have many more on deck right now. We also, as Greg mentioned, we were a big part of some of the relief and stimulus funds that were able to reach many of our partners. We advocated certainly, and we're happy not to administer actually the ones for hotels, lodging, live music event venues, movie theaters, the arts and culture organizations, but we did administer the $12 million that went to DMOs and CBBs. For a state agency who's never administered a federal dollar before, for a state agency that operates with an annual salary of less than $17 million, for us to get $12 million out to those partners to do the marketing locally that they desperately needed was a huge lift. It was really an all hands on deck thing. And I will say that it was nights and weekends and long hours, and I can't believe how our staff just smiled through the entire thing. They were so happy to be a part of getting that money to the partners who needed it. And in generally that spirit it just lived in our department through it all. It was hard, but people were so happy that we were in a position to be able to provide support. So that was a big part of our year and very important to us. So I wanted to touch on the theme of the conference around equity in economic development, and note that we had done a strategic plan prior to the pandemic where one of the 5 top strategic imperatives was creating a Wisconsin that was welcoming for all. So we had put a DEAI committee together, and they just happened to have their first meeting in June of 2020. They ended up meeting every month. They met 7 times in 2020. And that's a very active state government committee, but they were so enthusiastic. And I think it's both having that strategic imperative for travel and knowing the time was right. But then having the pandemic and watching historically underrepresented communities shoulder an undue part of the burden through that, especially in the hospitality industry, there was a lot of enthusiasm to just dive right in and do everything we possibly could. So I wanted to share with you who's on that committee. They work so hard. They dedicate so much of their time, and they're really doing a great job. They quickly, I'll stay on them for a second. They quickly broke the scope of our work into 4 big sections. We feel like we're in a unique position to make an incredible difference because of who we are as a cabinet level agency and state government. So 1, we spend millions every year in marketing and PR. So what is the content we're putting out? Who are we featuring? What channels do we choose to go into? All of these things deserve greater review, and that's something they've put on their list. Second, our industry relationships. We have fabulous relationships with our more than 200 CVBs and DMOs across the state, but also relationships with thousands of restaurants and hotels, attractions, cultural organizations. And they look to us for leadership and to set the pace on a number of things. And we feel like DEAI needs to be among them, certainly. Third, as our own agency operations, of course, who are we hiring? What trainings are we receiving is important. We're only 30 staff, but we can still make a difference in the work that we do internally. And finally, as an agency leadership in the role that we play in the governor's administration and with other levels of government, both federal and local, we wanted to see the work that we did here connect to all the other good work that is happening right now. So that's what they're thinking about. One of the first things they did was put up a welcoming all statement. This is on our consumer-facing main travelwisconsin.com channel. And it's a small thing, but it's also a big thing. It sets the intention, and it sets the expectation that we are going to be a state that welcomes all. And we were one of the first states in the country, and maybe still, I don't know, to have made this kind of statement to our travelers. Now, the thing that our committee grapples with, all of us think about, is you can say you're welcoming, but what does that mean in terms of the experience of a historically underrepresented member of a community? What is that experience for them in Wisconsin? That's what we feel is the next challenge, is to make sure that we're authentic and hold ourselves accountable to the goals that we've created in this space. It has already changed the kind of content that we've been discussing, and we've had a ton of success with this too. I didn't include all the metrics here, but I can see from the numbers that this is content that was needed and welcome. It was a hole that needed to be filled. You can see it's everything from highlighting how tourists can learn more about Wisconsin's connection to the Underground Railroad, to how they can patronize Black-owned businesses specifically, expanding romantic getaways to just naturally include LGBTQ community, celebrating these historic and important cultural moments like Hispanic Heritage Month, Native American Heritage Month, Pride Month. The list goes on. This is just a start. We have a ton of work to do, but I wanted to share with you that it's important to us, and we're making it a priority. So I want to wrap up here with how we believe Wisconsin is well positioned to bounce back. I'm really focused right now on providing the steady leadership that got us to the historic year that was 2019, but remembering in all that we do, it's about recovery planning and making sure that we're not just ready for the future that we know is coming, but that the businesses are open, that there are still doors to walk through for travelers when the time comes. That's sort of this now and later that we are thinking about all of the time. And then tightening those connections to the industry by making sure that we're responding to what's needed from our hospitality partners. So some positive signs for feedback. These are some external stats that we've been following and feel hopeful about. 31% of people intend to travel by car instead of airplane coming out of this pandemic. And already prior to this, 90% of travelers were coming to Wisconsin by car. So this is a good sign. I just heard yesterday that 1 in 3 travelers are switching from fly vacations to drive, and 1 in 5 travelers are switching from international to domestic. Again, this is all good news for Wisconsin. Only 9% of travelers indicate that they do not currently have plans to travel in 2021. And 63% of travelers say they plan to travel in the next 6 months. You can see this is a projection from Tourism Economics, very trusted resource in tourism, looking at what that recovery will look like. And like Greg said, it's going to take another couple of years. It'll be 23 or 24 before we're looking at the kind of numbers we had in 2019. But each step of this staircase is so important, and you can see what 2021 looks like. I think we can maybe talk more about what, how 2021 will break out, but slowly it's coming back. And what we've been saying is last time the world got through a pandemic, it was the roaring 20s. We have every indication to believe that when we get through this one, it's going to be the traveling 20s. We can see there's built up demand. The floodgates are going to open. The Midwest is going to be a hot spot. And the question is, what state will they choose to spend their money in? And our job, the thing we think about every day, the way we're setting up our marketing campaigns and playing out our strategies is to make sure the answer to that question is always Wisconsin. You can see it happening right now. Just one example is our winter campaign. We are in all of these channels: email, social, digital, PR, and paid search. And we're highlighting leading with outdoor recreation. Wisconsin is a winter playground. Get out there and play whatever way you like to do that. We have something for everybody. And then we're building around that the pieces that are the true economic development: hotel stays, more overnights, go, venture a little further into the state and try some takeout and other safe ways to enjoy Wisconsin in your bubble. So this is how we're prepping for the traveling 20s, just staying focused on mission, finding ways to implement that mission in a way that matches where the consumer is at and preparing them for what's next, keeping a pulse on that travel sentiment, staying close to the industry. And something we keep saying at the department is travelers going to travel, and it just needs to be about Wisconsin. And it's so fun every day to tell them why their choice should be Wisconsin. Because as you know, we are the right choice for anyone looking to experience an unexpected moment of joy, make memories that last forever. So we're just trying to bring that to the people who are going to be making those decisions here shortly. David, that's all I have. Oh, I think you're on mute.
Yep. Well, that's plenty, and that's wonderful. I learned a ton in a very short period of time. We all kind of live in our own bubble or environment of where we go and what we do. And many of these things we don't hear about or follow. I think it's been a long time since I've gone to a campground with my family, but those were good times. And it's great to hear that you're getting the reception you are on your website in people looking for those resources. If I were to put a ribbon around our panel here, one thing, again, we know it, but the message is getting out there more and more. Wisconsin is a place to go and is very hospitable. You take the Marcus hotels and the Marcus theaters and the people, and I've been to movies in the theater with spacing and in a very quiet theater, but the staff is very courteous. The Fiserv Forum, when it first opened up, the staffing training was amazing and is and continues. If there's ever a question or an issue, there's somebody there to help you out. At State Fair, when it was open and when it will reopen, for whatever is going on. Kathleen's staff is wonderfully trained and in making it a fun activity to go to, and that's why these numbers are going up across all these venues. So that's all great to hear. I think we did a great job on putting this panel together, because there's a great domino effect here across all of these participants in promoting our state for tourism. So thank you again, everybody, for participating. I got one comment here. Kathleen put up the direct link to order your cream puffs. So for the weekend, your weekend enjoyment. Please make sure you check that out. Any other comments by any other panelists before they cut us off? Hearing none, thank you, audience. Thank you again, panelists, and have a great weekend. Stay warm.
Thank you.
Downtown Milwaukee is officially open. Open spaces, open skies, open waters, open doors, open arms. There's so much open in safe and scenic downtown Milwaukee. So make it back safely.
Thank you, Beth, once again for coordinating such a lively discussion. Next, we're going to take a short break, brought to you by Veerbeek. See you in just a few minutes.
Welcome back. Our next discussion will be examining the rebuilding efforts following the summer protests in Milwaukee, Kenosha, and Madison. How have other neighborhoods in the past recovered from similar situations? Please welcome moderator Scott Harrington from Vandewalle and Associates to introduce this panel.
Thank you, Mary. I'm Scott Harrington, Principal Planner with Vandewalle and Associates. We're an economic development, planning, and urban design firm with offices in Madison and Milwaukee. And I'm very honored today to have great panelists with us who have been dealing with some of the fallout of some of the civil unrest. I'm going to ask them to each introduce themselves, and then we're going to conduct this as really more of a panel discussion. So we're not going to bombard you with PowerPoints and a lot of statistics, but really more about what these experiences have been and how communities and businesses are moving forward. So let me start with Mayor Antaranian from Kenosha.
Thank you very much. I'm a pleasure to be here today. John Antaramian. I'm the mayor of the city of Kenosha. I've been the mayor for over 20 years and served 10 years in the state legislature prior.
Great. Thank you, Mayor. Glad to have you here. Tiffany Kenny from Madison Central BID.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tiffany Kenny. I am the Executive Director for Madison's Central Business Improvement District. actually Madison's only business improvement district. Unlike other communities, we only have one. I have been in that position for 5 years. And in 2019, we had renewed ourselves on our 20th year, going into our reauthorization for another 5-year period. So 2020 was quite a year.
Thanks, Tiffany. Pat O'Brien with M7.
Hi, Scott. Thanks for having me. I'm Pat O'Brien, Executive Director of the Milwaukee 7, Regional Partnership, and President of the Milwaukee Development Corps and the Milwaukee Urban Strategic Investment Corps, where we do catalytic community-based real estate projects and business development in the inner city.
Thanks for being here. And Christian Vaughn with WEDC.
Yes, great. Thank you so much. Very excited to be at WEDA 2021 and seeing everybody. So I'm very pleased to be on this panel today. My name is Christian Vaughn. I'm a regional director with the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. I am within our business and community development division. Specifically, I work on a 3-person team out of our Milwaukee office that services southeastern Wisconsin. So our service area aligns with the M7. And so Pat is a very close partner of ours, as we have also done extensive work in the city of Kenosha. So very pleased to be here speaking alongside the mayor as well.
Great. Well, glad to have all of you here. So let's kind of jump into it. You know, the focus of this panel is really on recovery from some of the civil unrest that has taken place over 2020, and with sort of a focus on Madison, Milwaukee, and Kenosha. We know a lot of what led to the protests is really based in, you know, historic economic inequality and racism. And there are other panels at this conference that are going to delve into those much deeper. But we certainly understand there's underlying causes that are economic that need to be addressed. What we really want to focus on today is how the communities have responded where, unfortunately, the peaceful protests, some individuals took advantage of that to escalate that to rioting and looting. And we saw significant damage on State Street and Capitol Square in Madison, various locations in Milwaukee, and then the west end of downtown of Kenosha. So, Tiffany, I thought maybe you could kind of start by talking about what are some of the challenges that businesses face beyond simply broken glass and lost merchandise. Not that those aren't bad enough, but other things that we may not be aware of on just how much of a challenge this has been for those businesses to recover.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. You know, it's an important conversation that we think about all the elements that our small businesses and those businesses that were impacted are dealing with. You know, we are the Business Improvement District, as I mentioned, in Madison, 20 years old. We have 237 parcels, 400 businesses that are on that first floor retail service level. And then there's 151 that were on State Street as of May 1st. And now we're down 30. So that's a stat, that's not a great stat, but it's one that I think is important to share. So as we kind of move forward, we can talk about why those businesses are leaving. You know, there's a variety of reasons. Obviously, COVID-19 is also playing an important or significant role in those departures. But those businesses, in addition to, as you mentioned, the vandalism, the broken glass, the damaged businesses, stolen merchandise, we also have a lot of other issues that our businesses had to deal with. Insurance was a challenge for many of our businesses. Not that they weren't insured, but just the variety of coverage available to them. We have businesses who had deductibles of somewhere like $25,000, $30,000, and every incident of protest or damage or destruction would be counted individually. So I have one business who paid 3 deductibles of $25,000. So that was a big challenge, and not one that I think many people understand. So yes, they had the insurance, but did they have those deductibles to cover it? We had infrastructure stolen out of the businesses. So computer terminals, point of sales, businesses that may have had an online presence weren't able to pull that online presence together quick enough because they lost their server. So those were some challenges. And then I think, you know, we've got 2 other big ones. One now is reputation and image, what people think about in Madison and how they feel about coming to our stores. Are they safe? Is it a comfortable place? And then the last piece, and the piece that I think is really hard for everyone to really understand, is the mental and emotional damage that has happened to many of our businesses. I'm so proud of the number of our business owners who were there participating in the peaceful protests. I have a shop owner there with her 2 young children. I've got a family, an interracial family, who are there. They're small business owners and they're proud to be part of that protest. And then that evening, they're watching the damage to their businesses, or they're watching the, in some cases, there was one, an employee, who got a little bit roughed up in one of the situations. So it's really hard for us to think not only about the business, the thing, but to make sure we're thinking about the people behind the thing. And one of our maybe biggest challenges is that in downtown Madison, we are a diverse community. We have 62% of the businesses downtown are owned by women or minority owners. And so they feel really challenged by this whole conversation. I think we know there's a lot of work to do to bring in more equity and more inclusion. And on State Street in particular, we do not have a business that is owned by a Black person. And so we think we need to work on all of those things to make sure that our downtown really feels inviting and inclusive. But we've got a lot of emotional and mental healing to do before we can even work on some of those things.
Great. Well, thanks so much for sharing, Tiffany. And, we'll talk in a minute about how you're addressing some of those issues. But let me kind of turn to Pat O'Brien. M7's really a regional organization, yet you all kind of decided to try to provide some support for impacted businesses. Tell us a little about, as an organization, what kind of led to that decision, and then what did that assistance look like?
Sure, Scott. So although we're a regional organization, we think it's important that we dig into, actual community issues. And in fact, we have 3 legs of our strategy. There's the traditional growth strategy, business attraction, expansion, and creation, that we're mostly known for. There's talent development strategies, and there's really 4 pools of talent development: the traditional K through 16 education pipeline, the upskilling of current workers, the attraction and retention of existing talent. But the fourth pool of workers is really the untapped potential. So it's getting involved with those people that we need to make our economy really hum. And then the third leg of our strategies is the livability piece. And a big piece of that livability piece is a couple of affiliates of ours, the Milwaukee Development Corps and the Milwaukee Urban Strategic Investment Corps, which invest dollars in catalytic, community-based real estate development operations and business development, which is really more geared for Main Street businesses than anything else. So that's how we got in. And as these things were the civil unrest was happening, we had some philanthropists that said, what can we do? And they contributed money to the Milwaukee Metro Association of Commerce Community Fund. And we had our MDC affiliate manage and administer the program. And we pulled in 4 or 5 bid directors, business improvement directors from the African American and Hispanic community, where much of this unrest happened, the City Department of Development, the City Police Department, and formed a committee around this to help assess, vet, and figure out how to use the funds. And as Tiffany said, it's glass damage, it's inventory, it's business property, and it's other types of things that just get these guys up and going, provide a gap funding between their and their insurance, or just cover it. So that's where we came from.
So that assistance was in the form of kind of outright grants versus low interest loans?
Yes. Yeah, we knew it had to be grants, because these people, they don't, these are small businesses. They're living on the margin anyway. We asked them to use their insurance to the extent they could, but we would fill the gap between when they got the insurance and not. And at least in Milwaukee, we were fortunate. When you saw the pictures and the video of the damage and all the boarded up windows, more than half of that was actually protection, against future damage. But there was plenty out there. I think we raised $600,000. We invested over $300,000 in these things, including some streetscaping, to just change the nature of the neighborhood. And I think, as was also mentioned here, it's not just the physical damage, but it's the emotional and psychological damage that goes along with this. So I think bringing in outside money into a disadvantaged community is important, both to tell people that, we're with you, and also we were able to connect. As a regional entity, we have better access to more funds than somebody in a disadvantaged community would.
Thanks for sharing. And then likewise, WEDC got involved. Here you're a state agency, but decided to get involved at a very local level. Christian, can you kind of explain the department thinking, with that and what those programs look like?
Yes, absolutely. So WEDC, when the events occurred in Kenosha, we started monitoring them very closely. We have very longstanding, strong partnerships with the Kenosha Area Business Alliance, the City of Kenosha, Downtown Kenosha, Inc., which is the business improvement district downtown. We had some relationships in the uptown neighborhood. And WEDC, to give people some context, when we need to approach situations, we work through our partner network. And that is how WEDC administers both our technical assistance programs and our financial assistance programs. So we rely heavily on regional economic development organizations, counties, municipalities, local neighborhood organizations, chambers of commerce. And so when we saw these events unfolding in Kenosha, what we knew at first is we needed a team at WEDC to be assisting our partners. So we made the decision to put together a multidisciplinary group of people. We immediately brought in our downtown team that administers our Main Street and Connect Communities programs. They do extensive work in terms of strategic planning, marketing, community events, capacity building. So many people probably know Aaron Welty and Joe Lanazak and Adriana Saya if you do community development in Wisconsin. And so that, from the perspective of WEDC and the resources we have, that's one of the things that we focus on is technical assistance. We want to provide assistance, educational resources so that communities can advocate for themselves, develop a plan for themselves. And so in this situation, because our downtown team had worked with Kenosha previously, I had done strategic planning with Downtown Kenosha, Inc., there was the technical assistance side of it. So we were regularly working with CABA and DKI. We were trying to find inroads into Uptown as well through CABA and DKI. And Governor Evers then, and this is the financial assistance component of it, is Governor Evers then made a disaster declaration. And when he did that, that allowed us to then consider the Disaster Recovery Microloan Program. And the acronym for that is DRML. And that program is a program that was created a few years ago. And the express purpose of it is we recognize that when you have a disaster, whether it's a natural disaster or it's man-made, FEMA may come in and render assistance. Maybe you have an insurance policy that renders assistance. But as Tiffany and Pat have discussed previously, there's still sometimes gaps. Those policies, those things that you think I'm going to get coverage. I pay my bills all the time. Sometimes it just doesn't work out. And so what the DRML program is meant to do is to provide a microloan platform where a local partner of WEDC can then use those funds and disperse those funds. So as a member of WEDC's team, we brought in a gentleman, his name's Mark Tallman. He's a colleague of mine. He works in Western Wisconsin. He is WEDC's subject matter expert on DRML. So I really would like to give him a tremendous amount of credit because he's been an excellent colleague to work through on this. And so CABA received an allocation for disaster recovery microloan funds. They received a $4 million allocation. And I would like to just take a moment here and not, to run over too much of my time on this part of the panel, but I just want to share with people details about what the microloan program is, because when we rolled it out, when it became available in Kenosha, people began calling us and saying, what is this program? How do we utilize this? If our community needs this type of assistance, how can we utilize this in the future? So how the program works is the governor will make a disaster declaration, and it can be for a natural disaster, a man-made disaster, and that allows us to use the program. We have a set allocation of funds that's available on an annual basis. Traditionally in the past, this had been a program that had primarily assisted communities recovering from natural disasters. Wisconsin is known for flooding, straight line winds, tornadoes, severe weather of that nature during our storm season. Sometimes we even get, kind of extreme blizzards, snowpocalypse type situations. And so that's how we typically do it. In this situation, we had a very different circumstances. So when we make a determination about the appropriate amount of funds that we feel would be necessary to assist those businesses, the funds are released in tranches based on rounds of funding. So you're going to take your first round in, determine your level of need, and request the first tranche. If you don't need the full allocation, then you don't need to use it. Key features of what these loans look like for these businesses is they do not exceed $50,000. It is meant to be a more immediate form of micro lending. That small business owner has the ability to have at least 48 months to repay that loan. So we're trying to push that term out. It is principal repayment only. There's no, you do not have added interest payments to accompany that principal payment. The small business owner is allowed to defer that first payment for at least 6 months. There's a max loan fee of 0.05%. And under certain circumstances, there are situations where some of those loans might be forgivable. And that's based on criteria set by the partner organization that receives the allocation. So the big idea here behind this microloan program is we want it to be adapted to the circumstances. We recognize that this is going to be a short-term program that is meant to aid in the recovery. We know businesses have to stand themselves back up. They need to restock their shelves. They need to do whatever they feel is appropriate. When you layer on coronavirus, that makes it far more challenging. But that notwithstanding, we want the program to be useful to people in multiple communities and multiple settings.
Great information. Thank you. So, Mayor, we kind of heard about the state's response to some of what challenges that businesses have in Kenosha. Can you tell us a little about the Kenosha community response, and not just necessarily what the city did, but what other organizations kind of stepped up and tried to help out?
And I think I want to touch on a couple things. First off, Tiffany really hit, I think, the nail, the hammer on the nail, when she talked about what was going on with the community and how the community impacts how the recovery occurs. And so I think that was really very good in the sense of we found something very similar in Kenosha, where you had a number of art groups that came out, and they were the ones painting the boards and from the windows that had been broken and boarding up. Those type of things happened. The number of people that came out just to do cleanup and to help with their neighbor. And that part to me, I think, is one of the most important aspects of what happened, is that the neighborhood and came together and worked with the business community to try to clean up what was going on and to show support. And I think that was very, very important, and something that I think is very positive to a community as to, again, maybe outside folks don't see that, but inside, when you look at what people did, you have to feel very proud of all of them for stepping up, coming forward, and either with financial aid or just being there to do work and help clean up the neighborhood. So I think Tiffany's comments were really dead on. And Christian actually hit upon what, the municipality, the city had asked for funds from the governor, and the governor did not flinch. He was very quick in coming in, and we do appreciate WEDA and what they had done on this whole issue, and appreciate the governor's support. But I think that some of the other aspects of this group, as you look at what's going on, I'm going to touch a little bit more on the shortfalls. And before I do that, I want to thank the Insurance Commissioner's Office, because I called the Insurance Commissioner's Office because we were concerned about different individuals not being able to, having concerned about their coverage and what was going to happen. And the Insurance Commissioner sent 2 people down to Kenosha so that the business owners had the ability to talk with them and discuss them directly, along with going through their legislator. But they came down, and I think that they deserve credit, and I want to make sure that people know that that sometimes we don't always make that call, and we should, because people are there to be helpful if you ask them. And I just wanted to make sure the Insurance Commissioner's Office got some credit for what they did. I'll touch a little bit though on some of the, basically the bid district, CABA. You've heard from everyone else what all these groups did and the involvement of the community. But I also think it's important that we look at where things didn't work, in a sense. And I think that maybe that's where we need to talk a little bit about changes that need to be made. And I'll use FEMA and the SBA as examples, though they were trying to be helpful. And I don't want anyone to walk away saying that these folks weren't there to try to help. They were. But the policies and procedures they have in place make it very difficult for these small businesses to qualify for some of the aspects of what's going on. Either you have to have a certain number, or you have to have just different requirements that they have. And I understand you need requirements to make things work, but I think we need to take a hard look on a federal level at how these programs are functioning. And there needs to be some latitude that when they come into a community, they have the ability to help some of these folks out who are really caught in a catch-22. The insurance company can't come up with aren't going to give you the money right away, or the deductibles that Tiffany was talking about. Those type of things can stymie a business from recovering dramatically. So from my perspective, people stepped up, and that's what you have to ask for, and that's what you want them to do. The city also stepped up in putting funding in to make things, to enable some of the businesses to stay open. I had a private company that's Snap-on Tools that stepped up earlier on for COVID. I mean, so there are a lot of folks who stepped up to do things, and I'm appreciative of that. So as a community, I'm pleased with what we've done and what the people did, because government is one thing, but it's the neighborhood, it's the people wanting to get involved to make something happen that deserve the credit. So from my perspective, I think that we need to look at not just what went right, but what didn't go quite as, and I shouldn't say that they didn't go wrong, but what we might do to change some of the policies that we have in place that enable more help to be given when these type of situations occur, whether it's COVID or civil unrest.
Great. Oh, great insight, and so wonderful to hear, all the community response. Tiffany, do you have anything you want to kind of add to that and how the community responded to what happened in Madison?
Yeah, I do. I absolutely want to comment on that, because that is, for me, I'm always trying to find that silver lining, and that was our silver lining, was the outpouring of love and support from our community. The intersection at the top of State Street in the Capitol Square is the most pedestrian used intersection in the state of Wisconsin. And I think that's actually not only because it's on the Capitol Square, but because people love State Street across this country, across Wisconsin. It's a place that people know for its pedestrian mall. If you're a UW graduate, perhaps you loved it. Who knows why you're connected to State Street, but there's a lot of people who are. And so at about 5:30 a.m., I started getting the phone calls on the morning of May 30th from the organizers of the Boys and Girls Club of Dane County. And through another partnership, we've seen these interesting Facebook groups pop up. So we've got Dane County Neighbors Helping Neighbors. So that organization, which is just a Facebook group, as well as the leadership of the Boys and Girls Club, within about a week, raised $200,000 for our downtown businesses to put them back together a little bit. We did allocate about $30,000 of that money out to organizations that would help kind of give an extra boost. So like organizations like the Black Chamber of Commerce, the Latino Chamber of Commerce, they each received $10,000 just to sort of help them with the work as they helped us put everyone together. It was a small pool of money. And more than anything, it made people feel supported. It was about 60 some businesses that ended up getting grants anywhere from $5,000 to $7,000 in that. And so that was a really important, back to that emotional part of it. Not only was it helpful financially, but it was emotionally supportive. Those donations came in $25 increments, $50 increments. I think there was a $5 here and there, people supporting downtown how best they could. And then our artists took over. And man, has that been a controversial project? I didn't know. Who knows, right? How can that art be both wonderful and so controversial at one time? But it is. And we're trying to figure out as we move forward what we do with that art. We'll talk about it in a little bit here, but a lot of those boards need to come down. We don't have them all down in Madison yet. So we're looking at ways that we can continue to bring the people, the artists. They came downtown, they took ownership of that space, and they put messages up. They conveyed how they felt about our community. And as we watched that happen, we also heard them say, "This is my downtown. I feel more welcome here than I ever did." So that's a really interesting point for us. How do we make sure that the artists, and most of them, we did work with the city of Madison as we went through this process of matchmaking. Artists applied to the city to be a part of it, and the Business Improvement District matched those artists up then to the property owners. sometimes successfully. Sometimes our matches weren't perfect, but we did work really hard on doing that. And now how do we give those artists the appropriate credit for what they were able to do? Well, also at this time, we've got to take the boards down, we've got to move forward, and we can't forget any of the importance of those messages that were there. So we thank the community for coming forward with the finances, the artists with the art that they brought forward. And then, like we were mentioning, those partners, people who perhaps in the past we were working in our little silos of work, you know, Latino Chamber of Commerce, Business Improvement District. We've seen a lot more collaboration and cooperation than ever before as we try to reemerge, recover, whatever we're going to be doing here in the future as downtown Madison. And then the last piece, we did not have a downtown Madison fund. It was not something that existed prior to this year. So with our partners at the Madison Community Foundation, we have begun that. It's a small effort for now, but we think sort of as we plan for the future, as we plan for growth, we put a lot of loose parameters around that downtown Madison fund because we know there's a lot of work that we're going to need to dig in and start doing.
Great. Well, thanks for sharing. And again, wonderful to hear. It's also a great transition to maybe start talking about some of the longer term initiatives that are maybe underway or are going to be needed to help these businesses sustain over time and to help these business districts recover. As you mentioned, Tiffany, so much of this is about feeling and emotion and is it safe to go down there and how do we kind of recover that? Wanted to maybe have the mayor talk a little about what's happening in Kenosha. When we were kind of setting this panel up, Christian had mentioned that some of the support that the state brought in, for example, obviously was very critical. But in a way, it's sort of like a spaceship kind of flies in, sort of does its thing and flies away. And while they left the place, in a better condition than they found it, there's still a lot more work to be done long term, and certainly work to be done to address a lot of the systemic problems that led to the protests. And Mayor, I know you've had a number of initiatives that you've been working on for quite a while, well before this. But can you kind of talk about some of your, economic building efforts and business development efforts that can help the community long term through some of these issues?
Yeah, I'm glad to. This is for Kenosha an exciting time as to what is happening, because we have an opportunity to improve our community tremendously, not just on the basis of what occurred, but what we can become. And so to do that, though, you need to do a number of things. And we had started a number of projects earlier, in some cases 2 years ago. And so I'll talk about a little bit of that because it all plays into what's going on. But for some of the immediate things, is one of the items that we have just done is the city is in the middle of purchasing an old bank building in the uptown area that was heavily damaged. And in that building, we've got a number of projects that are going to be going on. We've got the universities and the colleges looking to bring in some of their folks into the building to work with young people and getting them college ready so that they have an opportunity in the older neighborhoods, so that there'll be access to the colleges and universities and the technical school. All of them will be located there, but also located there are a number of programs that we're looking at doing. Basically an Achievers Enrichment Program, basically an Emerging Leaders Program is what it's called. We're looking at creating that for young people so that they will have a facility or a place that they'll be doing. We'll have labs in this for educational. We're looking at employment programs in the facility. Those type of things will be there. Our CEO programs where we'll be placing people into businesses around the community. But those type of activities will all be located at this facility, along with Generator, which is a entrepreneurial group that is going to be coming in. And they will be working with the neighborhood to helping young people get started with their own companies and businesses. So those types of things are happening in one of the locations that is in process now. And that program we had started looking at, about a year ago as to what we wanted to do. It was just a matter of getting the property and starting to line up the funding that we needed to do to make it work, which is always the difficult part. It's easier to get a building. It is much more difficult to make sure that I have the funding to keep these programs going and alive. And that becomes one of the issues that as a community we have to deal with and try to expand upon. The other areas though for the city has also been the uptown area that was damaged during the civil unrest and some of the areas that were burned. We were able to bring in a developer, Gorman, who is looking to recreate that area with housing and retail. And we've been working with them to make sure that the retail that they bring in is going to be a retail space that's affordable to the neighborhood. So we keep the individuals that were in the community or in the neighborhood there. And so we've been working with them to make sure that the cost of that will be in such a way that the small businesses will be able to come back into those stores and into those storefronts. So that has been very positive in what they're willing to do. But the other part of that is we've been working with WEDA, with Gorman, to look at housing. And so we're going to be putting in about 80%, about 100 units. About 80% of that will be affordable housing. And that becomes very important to the neighborhood also. And that will provide more housing than we had that was damaged in the neighborhood. So that's a positive, again, for the overall impact of the community. So that's another program that we've been working on. The third program that we've had, which is probably the largest and the one that has been going on for a number of years, has been the old Chrysler site, where we're attempting to put an innovation center in. Don't know how many folks have knowledge of Cortex in St. Louis, which is about a 200-acre innovation center that has been created and is just remarkable. And the city has gone out looking at different places as to how to develop an innovation center in the central part of the neighborhood, because the reason this site becomes so important to us is that it's surrounded by 6 neighborhoods. You have the Lincoln neighborhood, the Columbus neighborhood, the McKinley neighborhood, the Wilson neighborhood, the Roosevelt neighborhood, and the Uptown neighborhood. You have 6 neighborhoods that have low to moderate income situations, and there is an opportunity to redefine what those neighborhoods are and what they can become. And so we're looking at education as a keynote to that. We're looking at trying to get a high school onto that site, and I'd like to eventually get a STEM high school on that site so that we have the opportunity for these young people to be able to get the core necessities that they have in education to be able to move up and do things so that they can get the training that they need so they can be the next policeman, the next fireman. They can be the next computer programmer. But at the same time, the Innovation Center is based off of helping young people become their own business leaders and working on that, along with bringing in major corporations that will be coming into the area that we believe to help with the neighborhood and doing things in the neighborhood. So it becomes a live, work, play type of thing, an education aspect at the same time. It will change the dynamics of the community and will give a whole bunch of young people an opportunity that they don't see right now. And I think that's part of the problem that we have. And when talking about the issues of systemic racism, is that one of the issues you have to deal with is how do we get to that next step? How do we make it so that young people see the light at the end of that tunnel, that they can become whatever they wish to be, that we provide them the opportunity to be able to grow, prosper, and become something important in the sense of their own life and how they live. So we're looking at it from that perspective. So it's a combination of things. It's not going to happen fast. It's designed in such a way to make sure that not only are those individuals who want to go on to higher education, they can and get the training they need, but also the technical skills that young people need who may only have a 2-year degree. That's why the technical college is so important and involved in this whole concept. So that is one of the programs that we are working on and have been. The colleges are on board. We're working with a number of corporations and other entities that we believe will be coming on board. The state has been in conversation with us, and we do appreciate all the help the state has been willing to give. And we've got requests into the federal government and also. So we are moving in the direction, I believe, that not only changes what the community is, but gives opportunity to the young people in our community.
Wow, very exciting, very exciting. Appreciate you sharing that with us. Christian, I know that WEDC also has kind of been evaluating their programs and looking at ways that those might be modified or could be used in a different way to address longer term needs. Can you share some of those with us?
Absolutely. So I do have a couple of points to address that question, that issue. I do want to take a moment, though, and talk about this idea of the alien spaceship analogy, because it was a unique experience how I learned about it. It wasn't something that I knew previously, but I think it's really material or impactful to this discussion, which is a few years ago, I was doing economic impact research in a neighborhood in Milwaukee. It had been a historically disinvested neighborhood. And in a span of probably 3 to 5 years, they started to see a series of mega investments, these large 30, 50, $100 million projects. And for a neighborhood that hadn't seen significant investment in probably the better part of a generation or maybe even 30 years, the neighbors didn't exactly know how to interact with that news. And so they had primary concerns. Are we going to be displaced? Will this community be the same way it is today, 5 or 10 years from now? Are my children going to be able to live here today? And in the course of that research, I had an opportunity to have a very candid and frank discussion with a community advocate. We had gotten to a certain point in the research and we wanted her feedback. And she said to me, you really have to understand something. We're trying to build our community, and we've been doing so for the better part of 20 or 30 years. And it really feels like suddenly somebody landed an alien spaceship, and we don't really know what it is. And we're trying to figure out how to work with them. Can they be our partner? Can they be our community member and our neighbor? Or is maybe that not, we don't know how to interact with that. And what that did for me, that's a learning experience as somebody who works in this field. And it really makes you feel empathetic and compassionate for the circumstances of community members to pause and say, how do we meaningfully engage? How do we work with the community in the most appropriate way? How do we build trust with this community? So for people who hear that analogy, I just wanted to provide that context that when I, mention something like that, that's what I'm really thinking about. But let me talk about specifically to Scott's question now, which is WEDC alongside WEDA with an H, the Housing Authority. We also have partners at DNR, Wisconsin DOT, Department of Workforce Development, also very interestingly at Department of Revenue. We do a lot of work with them, and Wisconsin Historical Society. And we have this goal for economic development in Wisconsin. We want communities over the long term to be socially and economically strong and resilient. That's our goal. We're looking at a multi-generational perspective for economic development. And sometimes that gets lost in the narrative. We look at the day-to-day or fiscal quarters or annual reports and how many wins did we get. But at the end of the day, we're really looking at that perspective. So that's our focus. So we know we need the short-term perspective. We also have the long-term perspective. So for people who are curious about, WEDC and where we're going, we have a set of programs. And for the better part of, WEDC's existence, now we've been running for the better part of a decade here. We have programs that work. But at the same time, we recognize that the world doesn't stop spinning. The economy is going to evolve and change, and we have to adapt to a changing economy. So 2 reports came out in 2020, the last probably year, that were, I think, important statements on the present conditions in Wisconsin's economy and what's coming. The first of which was the Wisconsin Tomorrow Report. That was commissioned by the Wisconsin State Legislature. They asked WEDC to produce a report about coronavirus in Wisconsin and the economic impacts. What's important about that report, is that it cataloged Wisconsin's industries, and it allowed us to do stakeholder engagement with members of those industries to understand how they were impacted. And that report really had 3 conclusions. One was get people back to work, which isn't just about getting somebody a job, but the broader narrative there is workforce development and education. We need to educate our people to be successful members of our communities. We have to upskill and reskill people. We have to focus on adult learners. We have to focus on people of multiple populations. Maybe they're not traditional populations. Maybe they're coming to the workforce from other circumstances. The second issue from that report conclusion was broadband. And we have a focus on broadband, but I think what's also important is talk about connectivity and telecommunications as well. Talk about rural broadband, talk about urban broadband, talk about 5G, because the thing is, computers are how the world connects. And if we want to remain globally competitive, we have to talk about internet connectivity. And then innovation, which is a broad category, but innovation is how we evolve. If we don't innovate, we don't evolve. And so WEDC has our set of programs. We acknowledge we have to innovate. And some of the ways WEDC does that is through things like our capacity building grants, through our targeted industry project program. We have key strategic partners that we utilize as well. And the reasons that we do that is because we are trying to find the next big idea in Wisconsin. Is it a new organization to encourage the development of social capital? Is it social entrepreneurship? Is it a new technology that can be patented and developed in Wisconsin? Is it a new manufacturing process? We're trying to look at that, from multiple perspectives. The second report that I think people should, take the time. I genuinely think these two reports, even if you want to skim them, I think you should at least take the time. The second one is Rural Voices for Prosperity. And the reason I bring this up is because we're having a discussion in the United States of America right now about urban and rural. And I know that specifically a lot of the themes today that we're talking about on this panel are urban, but we're more alike than we are different. And when we talk about community development, it's very true of urban and rural communities. And so when you read that report, you're going to see these key themes emerge about housing, childcare, education, public health, community services, community leadership. And so that in part is economic development. You can't do economic development without childcare, which is what our CEO, Missy Hughes, has said very regularly, and we all agree with her. Nobody disagrees. So you have to understand that it's like a big Venn diagram. We have all of these critical issues are overlapping, and we have to understand where they intersect and how economic development is going to plug into that. So I'm going to end my statements there. Maybe I'll say more in the Q&A. I was developing all these notes for this panel today, and I told myself I practiced for like 3 and 4 minute increments so that we could all have an opportunity. Maybe we get to it in the Q&A. So I'll stop my answer there.
Well, really good stuff, really interesting stuff, and be very interested to look at those reports. And I think there are other sessions at the conference that are covering those too. So, Pat O'Brien, can you tell us a little bit about where M7 is maybe headed that would address some of these issues?
Yeah, so I think we've been transitioning for the last 5 or 7 years from typically, in the past, economic development's been focused around businesses. 5 or 6 years ago, our membership told us you need to focus on talent. It was if the businesses were here, you would have the jobs. Then it became, if you have the talent, you can bring the businesses and they can expand. And the way to get talent is to have communities and have a quality of life in the communities. So it's business, talent, and communities. And those are really the 3 legs of our stool. And I would add to, so I think, Christian's comments are about the overall picture. It's not just one thing, it's a number of things, and you have to address all of those things. And the mayor's comments are around, okay, for a successful neighborhood, you've got the real estate, the bricks and mortar, and then you have the people. So you've got to combine that with activities that make sense. And what can the public good do with the activities? Well, it's facilitation, it's collaboration, and it's helping build the building blocks for those communities, whether it's education, whether it's upskilling, reskilling of people in the existing workforce, whether it's putting more people into the education system so that they can get better jobs, and doing that, or helping the entrepreneurs. So I think it's really all those things, and I think that's what we've learned. And then the last thing I would add is, the other thing I think we've learned through this process is this civil unrest and COVID to some extent, and we're not through it, and we may not even be through the worst of it because most of these businesses live on the margin. But the whole thing, this civil unrest projects, that we've been helping, people came forward, philanthropists, that was a nice pier where we helped and support and kept people afloat, for one objective, right? But now how do we turn that into a bridge so it's an ongoing, and that's a dialogue. And part of that dialogue is listening to the people that are in these communities, not throwing things at them, the alien spaceship concept, but listening to them. What do they want? What do they need? And helping them with resources, because these disadvantaged communities are disadvantaged for a reason. They don't have the resources. So I think I'm hopeful that, we've entered a new chapter in economic development and pulling regional, statewide things down to a local level and vice versa.
Great. Well, thanks for sharing. Tiffany, I see that, as you mentioned, the boards are finally starting to come down. I know it's been a long process where every time it looked like things were going to settle down, something happened. And so for Madison, it's kind of been an ongoing situation now for a while that hopefully is coming to an end. But so can you give us kind of maybe a longer view perspective on where to from here?
Sure. Thank you. Yes, it has been quite the journey with those boards, and my staff and our board is sick of the word boards. I think it's been hard, take them down, put them into storage, make sure we preserve them. Ooh, go get them, put them back up, find someone to help you. All of that has been quite a challenge for us. So I think, as we move forward, there's a couple things we have to do. We have to make sure that we continue to celebrate the diversity that we have downtown, as we continue to also grow it and drive more and more people to feel like the downtown is theirs. And we can't lose, as I mentioned earlier, the sense of belonging that came from some of that art. So that's very interesting for us. People felt like that was, they belonged there. And we want to make sure that we don't push people out of downtown who maybe feel more welcome than they ever have. The retail environment has been hard, and it was hard before this. We actually, when I started, I mentioned 2015. In 2016 and 2017, we conducted a retail study. What's the retail environment like downtown? How can we bring more retail into downtown Madison? And the challenges were already mighty. We can talk about the giant Amazon or whatever you'd want to talk about, but it was already a challenge to talk about how our retailers could be successful downtown and how we could bring more of that in. So we have to acknowledge that, and we have to think about what that might mean. How do we continue to provide support to those retail spaces that exist while also evolving? Because we think we're probably an evolving street. We always have been, right? Anybody who knows the history of State Street knows 1970s State Street is not 1990s State Street, nor is it 2020s State Street. So we'll watch that evolution. What I hope is that we continue on this holistic, community-driven planning effort where we all are coming together to the table to talk about what happens for the future. And we are fortunate that, it's been rocky to get city support financially or even policy-wise. It's been really interesting for us. I can't even list the number of efforts that failed this year at the Common Council level, trying to get either financial support or policy support on the local level for our businesses. What we have been able to do is we've pulled together 50 organizations, people like I mentioned earlier, like the Latino Chamber of Commerce or the Downtown Madison Inc., the membership organization, the Chambers of Commerce. And we meet every other week. And we hadn't done that before. And why we hadn't, as I jokingly call it the Chamber of Chambers, but why we hadn't been doing that before, I don't know. And what we are doing is we're finding a lot of success in collaboration and really, as has been mentioned before, making sure that we're not having that spaceship drop-in approach, that we're really looking at it like, what do people need? How are we building this community together? Or I guess in this case, rebuilding it. And from that community group, some great things are happening. We've already had a fantastic event together, a Martin Luther King meal where we celebrated community virtually, but we fed 2,500 people in our downtown who maybe needed food or just wanted to join us for a community meal. And we're looking at pop-ups and how can we reinvigorate some of those open spaces? Because as I mentioned on the front end, we have 30 of them. What I do know is that State Street is one of, again, busiest pedestrian spaces. We're a connection between the Capitol and State and the Union and the campus. And we know that there's potential for our State Street to reemerge really, really strong. What we are going to do is we're going to look at the city policies and the city grants and programs that are available to all, because that is what our city has been able to do. We've got the Small Business Equity Recovery Program. We have some other programs that the city has put together that apply to kind of citywide, not just specific to our downtown. So we're working as the Business Improvement District to make sure any one of our businesses that could benefit from any city programs do so. And then if they make the choice to do either a program like a GoFundMe or a Kiva, they're doing some of those things. I think we had at one point 15 GoFundMes, and I think there was like 7 or 8 Kiva loans. So we're trying to help share that information and get community support. And I think what you'll see is that we rebuild State Street in our downtown a little bit stronger, a little bit better, because it is a community-driven approach. We'll get to it here Safety will be our big issue in convincing people that downtown is that safe place that they remember, because it always was, right? And it always will be a good place for us as a community to celebrate together.
Great. Well, definitely looking forward to seeing it revitalized. I know in the program that Joanne Sabir with the Phoenix Project was to be a panelist, and unfortunately at the last minute was not able to make it. But for folks that are watching this, really quite an incredible project that sort of had its genesis in some unrest in the 2016 in the Sherman Park neighborhood of Milwaukee. So I would definitely encourage people to Google that, go on their website, and learn about that project as a great strategy for neighborhood and business revitalization. Our panel is supposed to end at 11:15. I'm kind of getting the high sign here that we're just about out of time, but wondered if anybody on the panel had a question for anybody else on the panel. I know that there's been a lot of wonderful information put out there. Again, really appreciate all of you participating, but anybody have a quick question for another panelist that you'd like to pose?
No,
yeah, Pat.
Yeah, no question, Scott, really, but thank you for having us. I truly learned a lot here, and I thought I knew most of it, but it's interesting to see the similarities and the challenges that we all have and some of the projects that resulted from it. So thank you for doing this.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, Tiffany.
I've got a question for Christian. Maybe as we think about moving forward together as a state, are there places that you see more collaboration, or places like ourselves, the Madison bid? Where do we play a role in this future state effort?
So I do. When you look at economic development, I think it's on a spectrum, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to meet communities and businesses where they are. What are you trying to pursue? What are your goals? What are your initiatives? And then what resources do you potentially need? Do you actually need financial assistance, or maybe do you need technical assistance? Maybe you need a phone call. Like you really need to talk to somebody, and you just can't get past the receptionist. But I think this is what's really critical, because when you talk about a business improvement district or a community or a chamber of commerce, that's part of the social fabric. And Tiffany and the mayor, you both brought this up. It's not just, oh, hey, I have a business. I have a shop and it's on this street and I go to work every day. You're a member of that community. In many communities in Wisconsin, there's also probably an apartment above the building, or there's an office above the building, or it's a historic building. So there's character to that. And especially for folks who've been in this community for a very long time, maybe you've moved there for a very specific reason. You have identity to that. There's this idea of cultural identity and cultural memory. You chose that for a reason. And there's a lot of people who make life decisions for that. And so, when you talk about how do we plug into that, I think, there could be a conversation about maybe some other types of projects or businesses or the bigger stuff. But here's the thing. When you talk about economic empowerment, or, something that the word I brought up previously was resilience, social and economic resilience, that's building at the foundation and then building it up. And so what's critical, part of it is one of the reasons WEDC does it through our partner network. I think in general, it's the best management practices, bringing people together who are members of their community, have the right information, can be supportive of projects, holding that community together. Sometimes, WEDC is able to come in and assist. Sometimes it's with money, sometimes it's with technical education. Other times it's a cooperative effort. It's like the Chamber of Chambers you brought up. Collaboration and brainstorming can be very powerful, because suddenly you realize we're not alone. We have similar ideas, and maybe we could share people, share money, and do something really great.
Great. Well, again, thank you all very much. I think we'll have to leave it there. This is a conversation that could go on for a while. I'm sure you're all open to emails from folks who are watching who might have some additional questions. And so would encourage people out there who have some follow-up questions for any of the panelists or all to do that. Appreciate everybody tuning in. And Mary, we will pass it back to you.
This year's final discussion will focus on how communities can continue to thrive despite population losses. Shrinkage is a process that needs to be managed, not a problem to worry about. Please join me in welcoming from Ohio State University, Dr. David J. Peters. Dave's primary research areas include social and economic change in rural communities, rural demography, rural poverty and inequality, rural crime, and adoption of agricultural and other technologies. Dr. Peters has published in top-tier journals in rural sociology, agricultural economics, and criminology. He has been awarded grants from the National Science Foundation, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and the National Institute of Justice. Now let's give a warm WEDA welcome to Professor Peters.
Thank you, Mary, for that kind introduction. Again, I'm Dave Peters. I'm an associate professor of rural sociology and extension sociologist here at Iowa State University in Ames in Iowa. And, you know, I study demographic and economic change in rural communities, and specifically trying to understand how small towns adapt to these changes. And the project that I'm going to talk with you today is about that, about how certain small towns have been able to grow quality of life despite losing a lot of population over the previous 2 decades. And what my team calls these communities are shrink smart small towns. And so this is funded from a project, NSF grant that we got in 2017. So that's what I'm going to be presenting here today for all of you. So first, I wanted to give you an overview of the situation in Iowa. Now, Iowa is only 3 million people, and it's largely an agricultural state. And so some of what I might say might not apply to all Wisconsin communities, but they may apply to some. So in Iowa, rural parts of the state have been declining in population for a very, very long time. Despite ups and downs in the ag market, population has continued to decline. If you refer to the chart with that green line, you see rural Iowa has lost population, where the dark blue line, that's metropolitan Iowa, has really boomed. In addition to losing population, rural Iowa has lost a lot of younger people, particularly those under age 55. That's the bottom chart. And the rural Iowa bar is that green striped line. You see that in almost every age cohort or age demographic, rural Iowa's lost population, whereas metro counties have gained in almost every age demographic. So rural Iowa is losing people, and it's a graying population. Now, one of the components that's driving population loss and the aging of the population in Iowa is really outmigration. So if you look at that left side map, that's the natural increase. So in most rural Iowa counties, people are having enough babies. There's far more babies being born than people that are passing. But if we look at the right side map, we see that it's outmigration, that if everyone were to stay in rural Iowa, population would be growing actually. But what happens is that people leave those communities and go to larger cities within the state, as well as larger communities in neighboring states. And so there's a large outmigration population. So given these challenges, particularly of outmigration, what we wanted to do in our study is to try to understand, does a falling population always mean that communities are withering in terms of quality of life? And that's the general narrative you hear in the national media and the national press, is that rural areas are declining and dying. And we wanted to find out if that was the case. And what we found in our study is that while, yes, you can lose population, you can still thrive in terms of quality of life, and that we've come to the conclusion, what we try to advocate or tell rural communities, that population loss isn't really so much of a problem, but you should think of it as a process that needs to be managed, and that having a high quality of life and high quality services in your community is primarily within your control. You have control over that. We also tend to discourage communities from doing what we think is the typical response, which is economic development. And I know you're all economic developers here at the Wisconsin Economic Development Association's conference. But the initial reaction in most small towns is we need to recruit a new manufacturing firm. If only we could get a new manufacturer to move into town that can produce or give us 100 new jobs, all our problems would be solved. And we tell people to try to be more cautious about that because the likelihood of success of industrial recruitment is pretty slim. It's competitive. It's competitive globally. Oftentimes, it can be expensive if you have to put in utilities and pads to build on a new infrastructure. And also, the likelihood of success is, as I said before, is pretty low. That your town can do everything right, everything that you're told to do, and you still might be successful in recruiting, because rural communities are at a structural disadvantage in the global marketplace. So we tend to discourage communities from seeing economic development alone as the only antidote to population loss and providing a good quality of life. We also want to tell communities that because the term is shrink smart, they tend to think that means give up, or that means no longer seek to grow. And so we don't. The whole idea of shrink smart is that the sole focus should not only be on growth, but that smart shrinkage means that it doesn't prevent your community from growing in the future. So having a high quality of life in your community is likely to better position your town to be competitive when you're going for that new industrial recruitment or business attraction, because it would set your community off from the thousands and thousands of other towns across the Midwest and the Great Plains. They're exactly in your same situation. Further, even if these efforts don't result in population or job growth, you're more likely to keep your current residents. As I said before in that previous map, outmigration tends to be the biggest driver of population loss. So if you can retain those residents, that'll help stabilize your population. And again, I know you're all economic developers, and this is the discussion in Iowa. That's not really about a job issue. It's really about a worker issue. We have a workforce shortage in rural Iowa, not a job shortage. So people, the workers, matter. And so focusing on quality of life really tailors your development strategy towards being an attractive place for workers to live, not necessarily where the jobs need to be located. So a bit about our data and how we identified shrink smart towns. Our data on quality of life comes from the Iowa Small Towns Project. And that is a project that was started in 1994, and we've been surveying 99 small towns in Iowa. That's one small town in every county, every decade since 1994, and that was funded by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And you see 99 dots on the scatter plot below. So first, how did we define shrink? Shrink is faster than average population loss between 1990 and 2010. And that's on that vertical axis. So you see that vertical line, the positive values indicate population growth on a standard score, and negative values indicate population loss. So everything in that bottom half of that scatter plot is shrinking in population. And we take this from census data. The next is, how do we define smartness? And this is one we went back and forth on what's smart and what's not. But a good indicator of smartness, according to our project, is to show growing quality of life. And this is subjective quality of life. So it's how residents in that town rated the quality of their services in that community. And we got this from the Iowa Small Towns Project survey data. And it's changed between 1994 and 2014, and that's on that horizontal axis. So you see in the bottom right quadrant, those are the smart shrinking towns. These are communities that are outside the gray bars. Those would be towns that had faster than average declines in population, yet faster than average gains in quality of life. And these 10 small smart shrinking towns run counter to that national narrative of general rural decline, declining populations, declining communities, withering communities. Those would be that declining group. But we also found on the top end of that chart, in that top right quadrant, we also did find some thriving communities. But our project, or what I'm going to be talking about today, is focusing on that bottom half, the smart shrinking and the declining communities. Last thing I do want to say is how do we define a small town? Obviously, Iowa's a small state of only 3 million people. So when we say small town, we mean small. The majority of our towns in our project are between 500 and 5,000 people, and only a few are above 7,000. So these are really small cities. And so they have to be a municipality. They have to have a functioning government. They can't be a village or some sort of just rural neighborhood. They actually have to have a city and be an incorporated city. And we added the stipulation that these small towns can't be adjacent to a large metropolitan area. So basically excluding small towns that are really suburbs of a large city. So among this group of shrinking towns, we saw this distinction between the smart shrinking and the declining. And when we looked at the quality of life data, again, that's how we determine who's smart and who is not. We see that the smart shrink towns have higher levels of quality of life on all of these factors that you see listed, and it grew since 1994. By contrast, the declining towns had lower levels of quality of life and declined. So we wanted to know, why did we see these towns that were almost always the same population, no matter if they were smart shrinking or declining? They both were around 900 to about 1,100 people in population. The rates of population decline were very similar between the groups. There was no statistical difference in anything population size, but we did see these big differences in quality of life. So the next question is, well, what accounts for that? Why is that? Well, the first finding is that what we found was that smartness really wasn't due to demography or geography. And so smart shrinking and declining towns are very similar, as I said before, in terms of population, in terms of the rate of loss. Smart towns also were not near large metropolitan areas. So one thing we did think is that these smart towns would simply be near large metros, or they'd be near an interstate, or they'd be near a lake or some natural amenity. And we found that wasn't the case, that these smart shrinking towns were not near large metros. They were actually in more sparsely populated regions. They didn't have a lot of major highways running nearby them, and they weren't near any natural amenities. Now, Iowa is a corn and soybean state. There's not a lot of natural amenities in terms of woods or lakes, but there are some small towns that do. So there really wasn't anything due to sort of the provenance of geography that would make these towns have a high quality of life. Now, the one demographic feature that we did find that was different, that the smart shrinking towns did tend to have more senior citizens. And I'll talk about this sort of at the end of the presentation, how the elder population really was key in helping efforts to increase quality of life. So I also have the data tables in these slides if you want to look more closely at them, but I won't talk about them much more in the presentation. And again, you can email or contact me after the presentation if you have specific questions or want access to our articles which we published these findings. So the most initial explanation for why these towns are growing in population was, of course, demography and geography. And we found that those really weren't important factors. The next usual suspect is economics. And you all being economic developers, I imagine what you would think, that these smart shrinking towns are the way they are because they're wealthy, or they have some advantage of a major employer. And what we did find is that economics partly explains shrink smart. First, but in ways you might not think. So first, shrink smart towns had their residents were employed in jobs that were full-time and full-year jobs. They had higher labor force participation rates, and that labor force participation rate grew over that 20-year period, which was kind of surprising. And the majority of them worked from home. So they had more people engaged in the labor market, and more importantly, of those people that did have jobs, more of them had full-time and full-year employment, which is important. And they worked near the home. And I think what working near home means is to have more time to devote to community projects. If they're not on the road and driving very long distances to the jobs and they're more local, their employment is more local, they have more time and availability to participate in projects and take leadership in projects. In terms of industrial or economic structure, we found that these smart shrinking towns had a larger share of jobs in manufacturing and construction. About a third of the labor force in these towns were employed in manufacturing and construction jobs versus a little over a quarter in the shrinking towns. And most kind of the really surprising thing is that these jobs, in these blue collar jobs or more traditional blue collar jobs, they had a 6.5 percentage point gain over 20 years, where it was flat in the shrinking towns. So if you think about small towns in Iowa of around 1,000 people, to actually have gains in manufacturing and construction jobs between 1990 and 2010 is actually kind of amazing. And our explanation for why this might contribute to smartness is, these jobs tend to require a mid-level of skills, and they pay sort of middle range wages because of a history of unionization, whether they're unionized or not. They generally have higher wages and pay better benefits to compete with union jobs. And these kinds of occupations are pretty well suited to the rural labor force, at least in Iowa. Very few people are unskilled in rural Iowa. But also, there isn't a lot of college graduates either. And so people with high school and 1 or 2 years of experience, or high school and a 1 or 2 year certificate in the trades, excuse me, that's my phone beeping, turn that off. That's very suited to the available workforce in rural areas. So they're good jobs. They're full-time, full-year jobs. They require some skills, and in turn, they pay pretty decent wages. We also found, conversely, that these smart shrinking towns really had less specialization, didn't have a lot of jobs in sort of the lower end services, retail trade, arts, entertainment and accommodation and food services and other services. So these lower skill, lower wage jobs that tend to have few benefits and are generally part-time and part-year, those were fewer in the declining towns. And because of this, we think we observed lower poverty rates because of all of these, right? That if you have full-time, full-year jobs, people are in relatively higher wage blue collar jobs, that this leads to lower poverty rates. But the interesting thing is, even though poverty was lower in the shrink smart towns, total median household income and actually total wages weren't any higher. So that essentially meant that it wasn't the amount of income in the communities that differed, it really was the distribution of that income. That in the declining towns, you had a lot of high wage and low wage people, but the average was pretty similar to what we found or the median was pretty similar to what we found in the shrink smart towns. So it was sort of an issue of income equality in shrink smart towns versus income inequality in the declining towns. So again, it was the distribution of income, not the overall amount of income in the towns that mattered. So what really drove smartness? Well, what we found, or the biggest things that jumped out to us, was this concept called social infrastructure. So you have economic infrastructure, you have built infrastructure, but social infrastructure is essentially how people interact with each other. And where we found the most interesting differences, the biggest differences, or the biggest departure between shrink smart and declining towns is on this social infrastructure. So for example, shrink smart towns had much more stronger bonding social ties or bonding social capital. So the ones highlighted in red and bolded are differences that were statistically significant and which we thought were more important. So residents in shrink smart towns said that they had more close friends in the community, and they said that they trusted their neighbors much more, and that their neighbors were much more supportive of each other in those communities. And you see that the rates are higher and generally growing in the smart towns, and lower and shrinking or slow growing in the declining towns. And so again, this bonding social capital, really promotes a strong attachment and identity to the community. We think that this foundation really makes people committed to their community and makes them want to do something to advance their community in the future. We also found that these shrink smart towns had much stronger and persistent bridging social ties, and these bridging ties are social connections that tend to reach across to different segments of the community. So for example, residents in shrink smart towns said that the organizations in their community tended to work for everybody, on behalf of everybody, rather than just for the elites in town. They said that their community organizations were accepting of having new residents as leaders, which of course, if you're from a small town, being a new resident is very isolating, and let alone to be a new resident and be a leader is a pretty good indication of a community being very open to new people getting involved in the community. Residents in the smart town said that their community was much more tolerant versus prejudiced of other people in the community. And the biggest one that we found is being open to new ideas. We saw that 60% of the residents said that their town was more open to new ideas versus 55% in the shrinking towns, and that it's sort of slowly grown just by a 1 point gain over time. But these towns are open to new ideas. And we think that, of course, this openness of organizations, this openness to new ideas really helps generate new ideas, new projects. It helps get people involved, bring in new resources, time, and long-term buy-in to having and seeing through a project to meet a community need, and kind of seeing that all the way to the end. And lastly, we found that residents in shrink smart towns also really were pretty involved in local organizations. And so there are much higher rates of participation and membership in local organizations, and also importantly, organizations that meet outside of the community. So these connections to outside groups, so a lot of it was agricultural related, sometimes church related, or other kind of civic or fraternal organizations. But really this linkage to outside groups we think is critically important, because it's a conduit to bring in new ideas, technical expertise, and even new resources or new resources from outside. So if you have a group of people that are members of organizations that meet outside of the community, they can bring new ideas from other towns or from other states. They can bring in expertise that they might not have. And of course, it's a way to bring in extra dollars to help fund projects. It's sort of having these connections outside of the community and even outside of the state, we think is pretty advantageous for trying to do innovative things to promote quality of life in a small town. The other component that we thought was, very critically important, or that we found in the surveys, was that people in shrink smart towns participated a lot in their community, and they had a lot of pride in their hometown. We found that residents were much more engaged, a little over, or just at 50% of the people in shrink smart towns said they participated in a community improvement project in the last 12 months versus only about 43% in the shrinking towns. The majority of people in the smart towns said that the whole community generally supports local projects. That was a little bit lower in the shrinking and the declining towns. And people felt that residents or the general public was much more involved in local decision making. So again, a real ethic of civic engagement, getting people to volunteer, participate their time, getting people to support what the community is doing in terms of projects, and feeling like they have a say in how decisions are made in their community, all were a lot higher in these shrink smart towns. And the last, I'll talk about the interview component here in just a few minutes. But when we did our interviews in these communities, this really came through, and we saw it in the surveys, is that these towns really love their community. They take a lot of pride in their community, and they are confident of where their town is going. So They felt their town, residents in shrink smart towns felt their town was a lot safer. Most Iowa small towns are pretty safe anyway, but they felt much more safer in the shrink smart towns. These towns, residents in these shrink smart towns felt their community better kept up. And this is, again, I think these are, it's a fascinating difference. About 72% of residents in shrink smart towns said their community was well kept up versus, just under 60% in the declining towns. And in the declining towns, that's been a 9-point drop since 1994. So they felt that, residents in these declining towns felt that their communities were becoming more run down over time. That's pretty telling. That the town is, in these declining towns, it's just it's shrinking in terms of population, or it's withering in terms of population, it's withering economically, but actually the physicality, the physical structure of the community is also withering or becoming more run down. Another really, I think, fascinating distinction between the smart and the declining towns is that, nearly 2/3 of people in shrink smart towns said their town has more going for it than other towns of a similar size, versus just under only 50%, or just under 50% of people in declining towns said so. And people in the declining towns felt that their town has less going for it now than it did in 1994. So just a general lack of confidence in these a general lack of confidence among residents in these declining towns of where their community was going. So, just very, very interesting. I mean, this is all picked up from survey data. All right. So, given we collect these surveys, we do these surveys of Iowa State, and we, bother people in small towns repeatedly to get them to fill out our surveys, which they generally do. But really, having people fill out a survey and asking a set of questions and having people fill out a survey is only part of it. What we really want to do is go into these communities and really do interviews, talk with people. And so the survey was a very good way to sort of point us in the right direction. We see something going on in the survey data, but we really want to interview people and find out, what do they really mean when they said that their town had a lot going for it? Well, why is that? What are they doing to make that happen? So the second phase of the Shrink Smart project is we went in and did interviews in 4 Shrink Smart towns and in 3 declining towns. And we did, talked with maybe 25 to sometimes 40 people in each of these communities. And we did more of a qualitative assessment of all these comments and interviews. And we tried to distill some common themes. These were common themes among Shrink Smart towns that we found in these smart towns that were absent in the declining towns. So again, this is very qualitative, but it really kind of gives you a better idea of what some of these local strategies were. So, in terms of the local strategies of Shrink Smart towns that we see in these Shrink Smart towns that aren't in the declining towns is giving, philanthropy. Almost all of the 4 Shrink Smart towns all had a very active system of charitable giving, and they usually organized fundraising drives every 2 years. Typically was the schedule. Usually was revolved around a particular project, and the amount of money that these communities had in these foundations was phenomenal. So one town of 600 people near the Minnesota border, they had 4 community foundations with nearly $750,000 in assets. And it wasn't just from one gift. It wasn't from some one old wealthy farmer, that passed away and his farm, and they sold the land. It was just small amounts built up over time. And that's just incredible when you think about a town that small having 4 foundations. So again, this ethic of local giving that provided them resources that they could use at their discretion, rather than having to rely on state and federal dollars that actually had stipulations, there were administrative requirements, but also, state and federal money is given for what state and federal governments want these towns to do, not necessarily what the town wants to do themselves. And so oftentimes larger communities will some of the larger towns that we interviewed, would chase state and federal dollars, but of course they had to do the projects that state and federal government thought that these towns should be doing, and it might not have, and those projects didn't really address needs in the community. So by having this local money, it allows them to pursue projects that they think is important, irrespective of what the state and the feds think. One thing we found out very clear when we did the interviews is that we suspected that local government would be local government or local economic development agencies. We thought these would be the groups that were sort of driving these community improvement efforts, and we found that that is absolutely not the case. In all of our Shrink Smart towns, it was led by community groups, not government or quasi-governmental agencies. And the general consensus that was said, a variety of ways, but the general, sense of it was that local government really doesn't help, but they don't stand in our way. But it was really community groups and active local organizations that really pushed this through. And in the discussions, part of this was really to help avoid any kind of political, we all know about small town politics, and that having, official government and official elected leaders, one step separate really sort of helped these projects succeed, that it was really community-based, not being driven by, an elected official or one or two elected officials. And so it sort of gave local government some cover in a way. So they played a supporting role. They weren't lead cast, but they were supporting cast in these projects. We also found that leadership was important, and so all these towns, whether they were declining or smart shrinking, all of them had strong leadership. They had strong active leaders. So it wasn't a matter of having strong leaders or weak leaders, but really was that style of leadership. And what really distinguished it was that these smart towns had a very open and shared leadership structure, where the declining towns, it was very traditional. So in the smart towns, younger people were encouraged and were leaders in the community. Younger people and younger residents were encouraged to take charge of projects, to take leads on projects, and older members really sort of stepped back. And again, this was a common theme, and these were again community groups usually associated with a foundation. A lot of the older people said, our older leaders said, our job is to really, sit back and sort of sign the checks, but really let younger people and younger residents, take charge and lead, because they're the future of the community. By contrast, in the declining towns, you had really entrenched leadership. These were people that had been in leadership positions for decades. In one town, people were serving in a community group and in city government for almost 35 years. I mean, basically, people stayed in positions of power for decades at a time. Where in these Shrink Smart towns, people would step on and step off repeatedly. But of course, as you might imagine, most Iowa small towns are predominantly white, and so were the leadership structure. In terms of gender, they tended to be more men, 60-40 to 70-30 split in favor of men. So there were women on there in leadership positions, serving on boards, but they were still, majority run by men. As we found, or as I discussed with the survey data, this, accepting or being open to new ideas, that came through very, very strongly, that all these Shrink Smart towns, really had this ethic of trying anything and everything that they think would work. So any idea was a valid idea. They would try it out. They would discuss ideas, even if they were odd ideas. Failure was accepted, that even if a project was proposed and was worked on and it didn't pan out, that was considered okay. By contrast, in the declining towns, if someone or a group of people tried to advance a project and it failed, there was a stigma associated with them. And so the people that had tried to get that project off the ground in the declining towns didn't want to have anything to do with the city, the town, or leading anything anymore. And so it was really a disincentive for anyone to take a chance on trying to move the community ahead in the declining towns. By contrast, in the Shrink Smart towns, there were failures. There were numerous failures, but there was no stigma attached to it. People said, well, some things are going to work and some things aren't, but we're just going to keep trying. That was sort of the ethic in these towns. And so getting people to be comfortable with taking risks was a key ethic in these shrink smart towns, because they knew that even if it didn't work out, there wasn't going to be any negative stigma attached to it, which of course was very surprising to us. So one example of these odd ideas, there was one town in the west central part of the state that had a rails to trails, a major bike trail that ran across the state, and so this community had this popcorn ball that they'd been working on. So they, 100 years ago, they had a popcorn factory. I'm getting a little bit short of time. They had a popcorn factory, and they had this big popcorn ball, and they had built a pavilion around it. So they thought this would be a tourist attraction. And so they spent money to connect their town, build a bike trail from their town to connect to this major bike trail that ran across the state of Iowa. So, and the whole idea was that you would lure these bikers off the trail and bike another 3 or 4 miles south of the trail to see this popcorn ball. And the self-build world's popcorn capital. Of course, it didn't work out that way, but the community supported that. They kind of chuckled to themselves that this project didn't really work out as usual, but they're still proud of the popcorn ball, and they kind of like to joke about it. And in fact, there's another town in Iowa that also has a competing claim to be the popcorn capital. So evidently it's not such an odd idea if there's two towns that are fairly distant from one another, kind of came up with the same idea. So again, odd ideas get discussed and new ideas are tried. Socializing, particularly through social media, seems to be a key feature of these shrink smart towns. And so there's lots of local events. And again, they're not big festivals, but they're small things. Ball games, trying to show movies in the local library or in the city park, just having pancake feeds or just, something to get people out in the community and start socializing. And so all these shrink smart towns were really known as active towns in the region. They were a town that always had something going on, and they pulled people, from other towns because they always had something going on. And a lot of it was communicated through social media. So we have another person on our project that is actually analyzing their Facebook pages of these towns. And it's very clear that these shrink smart towns have a very active social media presence. They have thousands, something like 6,000 or 7,000 followers of some of these towns that are 600 or 700 people. It's amazing. And it's usually, this is where we saw an interesting gender component, that in all the shrink smart towns, the people managing the Facebook pages and the social media presence were almost all all women. So that was an interesting gender dynamic. But getting to know Facebook, getting to use it effectively, and other social media seemed to be critical to letting people in town know what was going on, letting former residents know what was going on, and really trying to, get their towns on the virtual map, as it were, in social media. The other thing we found in talking with local residents and local leaders in these communities was that the projects they tended to engage with to improve quality of life, tended to be more mundane things that were within their control. So obviously, when you got talking with them, they always had, big ideas. They had big plans for their town. That was always the case, but they rarely ever acted on them. Most of the projects that did occur were things that impacted people in day-to-day lives. So daycare, expanding or developing daycare centers, building new fitness centers or building a new fitness center from scratch, opening a grocery store, expanding the grocery store, getting more senior transportation services available, putting in pickleball courts, because all the old people play pickleball, including my dad. And so there were projects that really benefited the day-to-day lives of the majority of residents in town. So it wasn't a big industrial park. It wasn't a downtown beautification scheme that is typical, because that would only, people wanted, it was important to have a pretty town, but most of the residents in these towns wanted practical services. They would say, sure, it would be nice to have give a facelift to our main street, but I'd rather have the daycare, or I'd rather have a new fitness center, or I'd rather, that the senior center gets rehabbed than having a nice downtown. So very pragmatic projects, and that's what was done, and that seems to have really increased quality of life. coming on 40 minutes here, so we don't have much left. Lastly, as I said before, these towns had a very strong attachment to their place, and they really kind of relished their role as an underdog. They kind of relished being a small, declining town that had the best fitness center. For example, the fitness center example was in a town of about 900 people, and they had younger families with kids in that town, and there was no gym. They didn't have a fitness center, and people had to drive. They were 45 minutes to the nearest fitness center, and they wanted a fitness center, and so they had a large foundation, and they put down $350,000 to build a new fitness center with 24-hour access, very nice equipment. They bring in instructors from the larger towns, and so in this community of 900, they take a lot of pride in having a better gym and fitness center and having good classes than towns that are 4 times their size. And so, being able to do these things that other larger communities couldn't really kind of reinforce this pride of being from where they were and really kind of relishing their underdog status. The other thing that was surprising to us is that, we thought, these communities maybe, they've always been this way, that, over the last 20 years, maybe they've always been an innovative town. And we found that, it hasn't always been the case. Out of 3 of the 4 small towns, it really happened in the last 5 to 8 years. That was something relatively recently that happened. And so what it took is just 2 to 3 people that really cared, and sort of success begets success, and more people got involved. In the last 2, the last second of the last one, the other more on the psychosocial side of it is, it became very clear when we talked with people in these towns that about a decade ago, maybe 12 years ago, there was 12 years ago from 2017, that there was this realization that nobody was coming to save their town. State government in Des Moines wasn't going to save them. Federal government in DC wasn't going to save them. Some big employer wasn't going to waltz into town and save them. That nobody cared about their town except the people that lived there. And so they really came to this realization, this epiphany, if you will, that they have to save themselves. And once that became entrenched and more people began to accept that, that's when things really began to happen. Because when we talked with people, they said, 10 years ago, people thought that it was somebody else's problem, that somehow, there'd be a change in the governor's office or change in the presidency, and that'll change our fortunes, or we just got to change this or that law, or we're going to get an employer in and they'll solve the problems. It was always, someone else's response. It was, their town was going to improve, but it was always going to be from something that had to happen on the outside. And then there was this general, long, slow boiling realization that no matter who's in political power, no matter what the economy's like, their town is going to go in decline. Whether the farm economy is high or whether it's low, it doesn't matter. But that it was really, up to that town to do something about it. And that's when people started getting involved. And lastly, they measure success very differently than how academics would measure success. We want objective measures, counts. You want to see that population increased or jobs increased or income increased. Well, for people in these towns, they don't care about any of that. Success to them is really what they think it is. It's really based on more subjective criteria. So in almost all of these shrink smart towns, you do see younger families that have moved in, over the last 5 or 6 years. Now, it's not enough to change overall. They're still declining population overall, so you're not getting sizable numbers. But I tell you, if you bring in 6 new families in the last 5 years, and they each have a couple kids, you're talking about a dozen or more, 12 to 15 new people in town, new young people with new kids in a town of 500 or 600 people. You notice that. You notice those 6 or 7 or 8 new kids. You notice those 5 or 6 new young couples coming in. I mean, you notice that. So it really changes the vibe of that community. I mean, it's I can't overstate more than just having just the presence of new people coming in and participating really changes the mood of these communities, even though they're still declining, even though they, it's relatively small numbers. It's just that a visible sign of success, even though maybe it's not a tangible measure of success. So I think you get where I'm going. Running out of time. So very quickly, summary, you have the slides. I don't want to belabor it too much, but we have a couple priority recommendations because we think that they're relatively inexpensive to implement. And you can sort of begin working on them right away, and that's promoting civic engagement and social capital in your small towns, getting people to participate, getting leaders to be open to change, open to new people taking control of things, being a town that accepts new ideas and accepts failure, and really trying to instill an ethic of being confident in your town, that your town has a future. That's important to do that, and it doesn't cost a lot of money, but it's a lot of work. I mean, it's a lot of time and effort to convince people to do this. We also, as I said at the very first part of this presentation, that the elders, senior citizens, can be a great resource. What we found in these Shrink Smart towns is that the elders in the community really gave their time, gave their money, and really gave their support. They were people of influence, and they kind of lent their approval of this process of these projects, and that really helped propel these towns to the future. So again, older people have the time, they have the money, and they just have the connections, and they're respected. And if you can get them on board and get them to sort of, really give their blessing to these projects, that really seems to help. Now, secondary recommendations, again, we say they're secondary because it requires money and long-term planning. And that would be, of course, what I mentioned earlier is, jobs in manufacturing and construction. I think I said this earlier, but really it's sort of like a hierarchy of needs that people are economically secure. They feel secure in their economic position, then they're more likely to become active citizens. If they have time and they feel secure in their economic situation, then they're going to care about other things in the community. And when they begin to care about other things in the community, they volunteer, they donate their time. That tends to lead to a better community, a community with a better quality of life. But of course, doing that, attracting those jobs is a tough job. It's a tough thing to do in this economic circumstances. So lastly, I should say, in terms of what takeaway lessons that we have is that, first, we're very clear is that shrinkage or population loss, what we call shrinkage, is a process that you need to manage. It's really not a problem to worry about. So this came through in all of our Shrink Smart towns. They knew they were losing population, and they thought, yeah, well, that may be a problem, but it's not our biggest problem. It's just something we're going to have to deal with. And so how do we manage this problem of population loss? How do we address it? How do we make sure we maintain a daycare and grocery store with a declining population? It's a management issue, not a problem to worry about. Second, that social capital, can help your community deal with any issue, not just population loss. It can help you deal with natural disasters. It can help you, deal with a crime problem. It can help you with a lot of things. And so social capital becomes very important. And the asterisk I have is to remind me to say that, in our study, we see that we find that social capital is far more important than economic capital or built capital. And in fact, if you want to get something built, you need to have that social capital to get it approved and to get it done. If you want to develop the economy, you got to get people on board, and getting people on board is part of this social capital. So really, the social capital is really the foundation that helps you build and expand that built capital and that economic capital. And lastly, quality of life is really what you decide, or what your small community decides, not really what outsiders tell you. It's not what it's not what Professor Peters from Iowa State tells you. It's not what your equivalent in Madtown tells you. It's not what some engineering firm or some economic developer tells you. It's what your community decides, what your community thinks is success, and what your community needs to do to improve quality of life. That's what's important. And that's what we learned from these towns, that they decided that they wanted to pursue, they wanted to identify and address needs that they felt were important, not necessarily what the university was telling them or outside consultants were telling them, but really what mattered to people in that community. And that's really the key to keeping people and hopefully, attracting new residents. If you want to ask questions or have a further follow-up, feel free to contact me. You can call or send me an email. I'd be happy to talk more about our project. And, there's some publications that we have, extension publications, so they're a little more digestible. We have academic articles to go with each of those, but, you can reference some of these. So again, thank you for your time.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this year's Governor's Conference. We look forward to working with all of you in 2020-21 as we continue to move the state forward. Best wishes for a safe and prosperous 2021 from all of us at WEDA.
All right, I want to thank everybody for joining us at the Governor's Conference on Economic Development. This has been so great. Thank you, WEDA, as always, for putting this together. And I'm really looking forward to working with all of you in the coming year and beyond as we get through this pandemic and we start our economic recovery, and Wisconsin will be better than ever. Thank you so much.
I want to thank all of you for joining us at this year's conference. None of this would have been possible without the support of our outstanding sponsors. Please join me in thanking our title sponsor, U.S. Bank, our official digital media sponsor, Walden Production Resources, our keynote sponsor, Baker Tilly, our exhibit fair sponsor, WEDA with an H, our login sponsor, Redevelopment Resources, and other sponsors supporting our event, C.G. Schmidt, Ellers, First Ring Redevelopment, Milwaukee Downtown, Veerbicker, Dairyland Power, and Wisconsin Indian Business Alliance.